Florence Viola grabbed her morning cigarette, a habit she should have kicked a long time ago. Lighting it, she took a deep drag and a breath of fresh morning. She sat slumped over as she smoked her cigarette, taking in the quiet of her old wooden house that had been empty, save for her, for so long. Each drop of her ash was another second closer to death, a thought that played in her mind every morning. Once finished, she stood up and started her daily stretches with an old, cracking body that emanated through that quiet, lonely room. "Another day, Florence. Damn, I'm getting old," she said to herself. Although in her 70s and somewhat cracky, her body still retained the strength of youth. Though that's easy to imagine with her daily workouts. She made her way to her quiet kitchen, opened her old, dilapidated fridge, a model that went out of issue too many years to count. She grabbed the morning's ingredients. After plugging in her old blender, she placed the handful of spinach, the 2 raw eggs, and a dash of fish oil. The sound of the blender whirring filled the entire house, the only vibration emanating from the house, save for the off, lonely night. She gulped down the mixture with ease, as she had done morning after morning. It didn't taste the best, but she still slapped her belly to complete her daily morning ritual. She then trotted off to her dark, cold garage and pulled the single-corded light. Fuck! It's not turning on. She kept pulling on it again and again. She sighed and then walked off to the shelf, which had a box of bulbs. The bulbs seemed to happen more and more with every year she aged. After installing the new bulb, the next pull illuminated the dark cement room. There wasn't much inside the garage, except for what was necessary. A large punching bag hung from the garage, and a box only a few feet away that only held the tattered gloves and hand wrappings that had become a symbiote over the years. For her, putting them on was like being enveloped in a massage chair customized just for her. Florence started to wrap her hands, thinking about the past that she had left behind. Looking at her aged knuckles, she thought about all of the fights she had been in through mentally while watching her beloved take the hits. She smirked as she thought of the times she had been in the ring. She knew she would never have been an actual boxer, but she trained like one anyway, and still does to this day. She put her gloves on and looked at the punching bag like it was her mortal enemy, and got into position. Florence thought of every past fight that he had lost, and thought she could have won, as she pummeled into it. Sweat dribbled down her forehead and onto her chest as she remembered all of the years gone by. Before she knew it, it had already been 20 minutes, her mind lost in decades upon decades of fights and wins and losses. She knew he would be the top boxer, but his cards weren't dealt right. She wiped her face with her wrist and decided it was time to be done with her morning routines. She unfastened her gloves and threw them back into the box with anger that lingered for a reason only she knew. Unbandaging her hands, she threw that in the box as well, and left the garage in a stormy rage, slamming the door behind her, the light still on. She didn't have much left in this life. No job, no husband, no children, but she still went on day to day acting the part. She went to shower and clean herself up, although sometimes a shower was the worst place for her, because she remembered everything she was trying to forget. She ran her fingers through her long, platinum, almost white hair as she tried to shake away all of those haunting memories from those many years ago. She stepped out of her shower, as she usually did, and dried herself off. That's when she heard the telephone ring. With the towel still wrapped around her body, she walked over to the telephone, not knowing what to expect. She hadn't had an unexpected call in years. She picked it up with her still moist hand, dripping onto the burgundy shag carpeting. "Hello?" she said with an air of confusion. "Is this Florence?" croaked a voice filled with phlegm and coughing. Yes? Who is this? She retorted, quiet, almost alarmed at the sudden intrusion of her privacy. I don't want any calls. Why are you calling me? Everyone knows this number should be deleted from memory. There was a pause and another guttural cough. I was calling you for a very specific reason, Florence. The old boxing ring that you used to manage. He paused for a moment. Is still showing up on the city's tax write-offs. It closed down in '89. I remember the date, she said, and then paused, as memories flooded back. I don't need you to remind me, whoever you are. Another cough echoed through the receiver before the man continued. The activity has been recent, and for some reason, Platinum Bandages continues to write off expenses that should have died off with your ranch. A long, drawn-out silence lingered on both ends of the phone. The man continued. Protein powders, ointment for pain relief, medical wrappings, shoe orders. And with that being said, he paused again. And personal training seminars. Is there anything you have to say for this? Again, silence lingered. After another of uncomfortable moments, Florence finally began. I have no idea what you're talking about. Surely you should know after what happened. I have shook my hands clean of that place. I am aware, but... Florence hung up the phone before he could complete his sentence. Her breath was heavy after she hung up the phone. She felt sweat gathering on her forehead. Damn it. I thought they would have left me alone by now. She put her hand to her mouth, pacing back and forth in the room. What could they actually want? She punched the wall, something she hadn't done in years, as she hadn't let her temper get that out of control for decades. That's when she heard a knock at her door. Could it be them? She thought. She put on a robe and slowly crept to the door, not knowing who would greet her on the other side. She looked through the lacy partition on the glass door window and sighed with relief. It was her neighbor, Larry. He wore his stereotypically loud outfit of a teal and pink Tommy Bahama shirt and red corduroy pants, as he had his usual cheeky grin on his face and motioned a silent wave. Hi, Florence. I hope I'm not interrupting anything this morning. He was, for lack of a better word, annoying, but he always was a good neighbor and an overall good guy. No, you're not annoying anything. Florence tightened her robe belt. What are you doing here so early? Well, I thought I should let you know that there's going to be a Christmas potluck at the community center tonight. I was wondering if you wanted to go. I know you don't like that place very much. He paused tentatively. But I thought I'd let you know. We'd all like to see you there, Florence. Pursing her lips and furrowing her brow, she didn't even respond, and slammed the door in Larry's face. She crossed her arms and huffed. The nerve! I know he doesn't know my true history with this community, but I've shared enough that he knows I wouldn't go 100 feet near that wretched building and their crooked establishment. Florence never knew how to fill her days, and the idea of going to the party flickered in her mind as she filled her time doing menial tasks. Cleaning, cooking, sometimes indulging in a book or film. It all seemed to get stale. Maybe she should try to socialize with this new community. After all, it had been years since she had seen a new face, except for a random greeting from a neighbor or the supermarket workers obliged to say, "Hello and have a good day." Shaking her head. No, I can't go there. Bored out of her mind, she decided to turn on a Zac Efron movie. She thought the young man was funny, but not funny enough to keep her awake. She hoped to take an afternoon nap. She awoke startled, almost like something made her wake up. Did she have a bad dream? Or was she perhaps just uncomfortable? No. Something felt wrong. Her house was usually lit up from her porch light that automatically turned on when the light of day faded, and yet she saw no light from her porch. Strangely enough, she could have sworn that the curtains were opened when she took her afternoon nap, but all of them had been closed. There was a strange feeling to the room, like everything felt heavy. With every step she took, she felt her body hurting more and more, like she had slept badly, or even been punched in her sleep. But that couldn't have been possible. She woke in the exact position in which she had fallen into her slumber. Something was drawing her to her very special place. She looked at the clock. She didn't know how early in the day it was winter after all, and even though it was dark out, it was only 4:50 in the afternoon. It felt like she was being drawn in two directions, to that damned community center and to her beloved garage. It was a burning feeling in her soul, an odd duality of community or loneliness. Despite the pain of her past, she thought she would go where the warm winds were blowing her. Florence never cared for fancy dress, and so simply threw on a pair of comfortable pants and a wool sweater to cover her old, withered, corpse-like body. She looked in the back of her closet and grabbed a pair of tattered sneakers that had seen more than they should. She let out a sigh as she slipped her feet inside of them. Large, too large, as they would always be. She hastily tied the laces and then rushed down to grab her things. Opening the entryway closet, she reached for her purse. A sudden spasm ran through her arm, and she dropped it on the ground. Among the strewn objects, two stood both together and outside the clutter of the other objects. Her keys, only a single car key, and a driver's license that had expired in '97. The whole ordeal, or lack thereof, had already raised her temper further than she desired, so she quickly snatched up the key and left all the other unimportant things behind. Florence walked out the front door, closing it behind her, the doorknob freezing from the winter air. She walked down the blustering, winding pathway toward the dirt driveway. In the middle sat a cocoon. An old, weathered, bleached by the sun tarp laid over a vehicle whose seats and mechanics had not seen the touch of a driver in many a year. Oh, God. She grabbed at the tarp, and the tattered remains hurt her skin with the sandpaper-like texture. Pulling it off, she revealed the old gray Toyota Corolla that she had known, loved, and forgotten for the last 30 years. With a mixture of the winter ice and the old metal, it took a bit of jiggling to open the door. Once sat down, Florence noted the cold in which the car felt. No, not that much different than her beloved garage. She stuck the key in the ignition, and with muscle memory, tried to ignite it 3 to 5 times before the old engine puttered up into working order. She let out a sigh of remembrance as the car stalled. With fierce strength, Florence pounded the dash of the car, an action that, for years, had always resuscitated the car into working order. Now she was ready to leave.
It's Florence to me.
Backing up the car, the windshield got foggy from how frigid it was outside. She laughed to herself. Huh. Guess when you've been out in the cold this long, I guess even the slightest amount of human breath will fog you up this much. Ain't that right, girl? Pulling her sweatshirt over her hands, she wiped the windshield, clearing up the opaque glass. She drove down the street she knew so well, but at the same time didn't. After all these years of being here, it seemed like everyone was a ghost. Or maybe she was. The community center was only a 15-minute drive, but even after getting to the block it was on, she circled it at least 5 times, despite the amount of empty parking spaces, thinking about what she should really do. Finally, hunkering down, she parked. Putting her head against the steering wheel, accidentally making the horn go off, She realized this is what she had to do. That maybe things had changed since she last knew these people. Hell, maybe the same people weren't even there. She was one of the older members of the Athletic Coalition. Maybe they had all croaked. That made a chuckle arise from her form. She got out of the car and paid the meter. Fuck. These things are getting more and more expensive every day. But still paid the meter. Oh, that's alright. But she still rifled through her pockets, getting the required amount of change. Thankfully, she had the exact amount, and put it in the meter like it was a hungry, money-eating spider. She looked up at the beige cement building with the blue letters reading NJRC. She had the inkling to spit on the ground for all they had done to her, but she decided to woman up and keep a high chin and walk straight through those glass doors. She was greeted with the pungent smell of pine needles. That made sense, being as there were fresh pine wreaths on the walls, decorated with cranberries and pine cones. She scoffed. This center has always spent too much money. They try to make an inclusive space, but everyone knows it's just an excuse for not paying their taxes. Everyone was dressed better than her, looking her up and down like some scumbag. Even though if they knew who she really was, they would be thanking her for the founding of this community center that has brought the true scumbags together to dictate what happens in this city. A fresh-faced young man with black hair and startling green eyes, no emerald eyes, walked right in front of her, stopping her in her tracks. "Oh my gosh, are you Florence Viola?" He extended his hand. "I'm Jeremy Effing. It's an honor to meet you. I've seen your pictures on the wall of history. You were one of the founders of this place, weren't you? You also founded Platinum Bandages." She ripped her hand away. "Yeah, that's me," she responded coldly, a look of disdain on her face and a look of disdain on her face and a rigid posture grasped by her body. "And who the fuck are you?" He coyly stepped back, looking shocked and running his hands through his hair. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. I'm the new community center chairman. I just started a few months ago. I didn't mean to be rude." She pushed past him, saying, Yeah, nice to meet you," and saw the wall that she loathed so much. There were names dating back to when she started this community center, but 3 stood out to her. Nicole Spandish, Jake Ferry, and the one that made her spine tingle and her heart beat, Clarissa Unia. That backstabbing bitch. She clenched her fist and punched to the right of her portrait. When she pulled her hand, she noticed a small indent in the wall. "What cheap fucking drywall," she said as she made her way to the main event room. Crappy Christmas music and shitty decorations, cheap decorations, filled the room. Old and young people were congregating every inch of the room dressed to their Sunday best, as if trying to look special for a pre-apocalyptic swingers party. Or so she thought. She walked up to the refreshments table and was greeted by an overly friendly Larry. "Florence, you came!" he yelled while wearing an ugly Christmas sweater with all the literal bells and whistles, because the Tommy Bahama shirt wasn't enough. "Yeah, I did. You gonna make a thing out of it?" she said as she ladled herself a cup of eggnog. No, just happy you're here. There are some great people." She raised her hand and stopped him from continuing his sentence. "No," she retorted as she took a sip of her eggnog. Larry nervously laughed. "Okay, but if you want to, just meet us in the circle." He smiled and walked off to join his group of friends. With an unhappy gulp, Florence forced the eggnog down her throat. Jesus fucking Christ. They couldn't even spring for alcohol. Nobody wants sweet, eggy semen at a party, especially a fucking Christmas party. She threw her cup on the ground. Her eyes lit up for a moment as she remembered she never removed the flask from her pocket. "I wonder if there's anything left in here," she whispered to herself, Taking a hearty gulp, she was happy to realize there was at least a shot, maybe even a shot and a half, left inside the silver container. Ah, the spoils of rarely doing laundry. She further perused the room with her eyes, noting the different cliques of old and young, noting the different visages of chastity and hung. Behind the DJ table stood a man in her 80s, whose brown pigtail wig looked worse than the shit-stained ass of a pig on a farm. Emmett, or Emily, as she was now called, had been an eccentric member of the community as long as Florence could remember. His taste of music had only ever grown into the 70s, and yet his antics tried to match that of a child on the internet. If dabbing and flossing makes you puke, Emily is the perfect tool of getting you there. Feeling a tiny buzz, that of a 13-year-old having their first wine cooler, she was displeased, yet happy that nobody had attempted to talk to her other than Larry and that annoying baby-faced Jeremy. Noticing a stack of poorly geriatrically wrapped packages, she grabbed one of the probable Secret Santa gifts that the community had pitched in to buy. Taking one last look at the, honestly, pathetic affair, she took her first steps away from the festive debacle. She pushed the glass door, not even knowing why she came in the first place. She walked about 3 yards and heard a voice. "Florence, is that really you?" She saw 3 people. It was Nicole, Jake, and Clarissa. Jake had his hand out as she turned around. "Oh my God, I knew that was you." She took a step back, dumbfounded by what they looked like. They hadn't seemed to age a day since she last saw them. She stalled. "Are you Jake?" He nodded his head and rushed forward to her, greeting her hands. "I can't believe it. It's been so long since last we've seen you. Where have you been?" She ripped her hands away. "What are you doing touching me? You don't know me at all." She turned around and bolted to her car. As she unlocked her car, she looked behind her and noticed they were all standing eerily still, staring right at her. She got into the car and almost panicked like Steak, locking it as soon as she sat in her seat and speeding away. What the hell? What's going on? Those people shouldn't even be working here by now. She thought for a moment. Now that I think about it, everyone at the community center seemed to look familiar. They all had friends, partners, or companions far younger than them. Is it really true? Their plan that they told me back in the 90s? They couldn't have really done it, could they? Those fucking bastards. She slammed on the gas and started to go in a direction that she had never gone in town. She felt tears welling at her waterline, but trying to hold them back like the strong woman she knew she really was. But she couldn't help it. The icy roads were too much for her outdated Corolla, and she started to skid. Before she knew it, there were blue and red lights behind her. She gritted her teeth and pulled over to the side of the road. She was worried about the minute amount of alcohol she had drank. Would the officer smell it on her breath? After the longest 3 minutes of her life, the officer opened up his door and slammed it behind him. Walked over in his pristine black uniform and sunglasses, and took a second to knock on her window 3 times, and cockily motioned for her to roll it down with his index finger. "Ma'am, you seem to be having some problems on the ice. You all right?" Her heart started to beat, knowing that she didn't even have a registered license on her. "Yes, I'm fine. I started..." "Yes, I'm fine. I just happened to lose control of the car. You see, sometimes these old hands just don't know how to handle the car the way they used to." He chuckled. "You know, you remind me of my mama." Florence faked a smile before looking down and grimacing, wishing this officer the worst luck he had ever had, before looking up. "Aw, Thank you, child. He patted the top of the car. Now you be careful. I don't want any sweet old ladies to be hurt today. You hear? Oh, thank you so much, officer. I'll be careful. You be safe too, darling. She rolled up her window and rolled her eyes. What a fucking asshole, she murmured to herself. Drove off, her heart fluttering. God damn, that was close. I really need to get a new license. She drove to her house, but she couldn't seem to find it. Strangely enough. What the fuck is going on? She thought she took a different road, but that couldn't be right. She saw all of her neighbors' houses, and all she saw on her plot was a gray building that said Platinum Bandages. She pulled up the driveway. Even though she had a garage, she never used it. What the hell? I haven't seen this place in years. She walked up to the door. It had a keypad that told you to put in a code for entrance. For the life of her, she couldn't remember, and then she closed her eyes and woke up on her couch. She gasped for breath as if none had entered her lungs in years. What the? She sat up and reached around for a pack of cigs that was sitting on the coffee table. Instinctively, she shot one up toward her mouth and grabbed the yellow lighter sitting nearby to light it. She inhaled and held it for what felt like an eternity. Exhaling, she blinked her eyes and readjusted in her skin. As a possessive spirit to a body, she took in every inch of herself. Huh. Did I just fall asleep in this outfit? She looked to her left and noticed the open flask on her couch. I mean, that has to explain it, right? She tried to take another drink, but, as expected, the flask was empty. She smacked her lips together and didn't quite enjoy the taste that seemed to linger on them. It was a creamy taste. Florence continued to puff on her cigarette, and for the first time since opening her eyes, she noticed there was dried blood on her fist. The hell? I know I boxed this morning, but I don't think I went that hard. Unless... The sound of a bird chirping rung in her still groggy ears. She hadn't even noticed that it was morning. Was it the day after? Had she fallen asleep after the day's workout? Of that, she wasn't sure. All she knew was that after putting out her cig, she needed to begin her morning light activity. Same as the previous morning, even if it wasn't. She made her morning health shake. After gulping down the unsavory mixture, she trotted off into the cold, damp garage. Taking a few steps, she found her way to the light's cord. After about 2 or 3 times of pulling, she realized that the bulb had yet again gone dead. She sighed. Every damn day, it seems. I know these bulbs are cheap, but I barely turn them on. She walked over to the shelf on which contained a box full of bulbs. She grabbed a new one and then fastened it into the socket. Simple pull of the cord and the light illuminated the room. As soon as the room was illuminated, she was brought back to reality, with another knock at the door disturbing her flow. She looked down at her clothes and realized she wasn't wearing a robe, but was wearing the same clothes from the day before that she could have sworn she wore at the community center party. Even though her clothes were sweaty and she wanted to work out, she decided to leave her garage and go to the front door. Once again, or as she thought, she looked through the lace curtain. It was Larry. Again. She opened the door. What do you want this time? Oh, I'm sorry, Florence. You left so hastily last night. Most people didn't even notice you were there. Was I there? Florence said, confused. I don't know. I didn't see you myself. What? You said hi to me yourself. You seemed enthusiastic to see me. I don't know, Florence. He rode the back of his neck. Are you sure you're feeling okay? You haven't left the house in a while. If you did go last night, certainly wasn't me you talked to. Seems like you want to be left alone, so I'll just do that. Don't worry, I won't bother you anymore. He turned around and went down her winding walkway, disappointed. What's with that guy? He always seems to be annoying me. Florence knew he had, or thought he had, good intentions, but she couldn't really tell. After all, this was the city that made that community center so popular. So who knows what behind anything in this damn wasteland. Florence got dressed and decided to look up her house and go to the driveway. She noticed that her Toyota Corolla was still under the sustained tarp, even though she didn't remember putting it under it. She tore it off anyway, disregarding the pain it left in her hands. Strangely enough, the car looked exactly as it did the previous day. Same dust, same condensation. It's like she hadn't drove it since '97. Just like it did yesterday. She got in the car and without even thinking, slammed the dashboard as she turned the key, making it start in record time. She pulled out of the driveway and headed to her actual destination. Yesterday seemed strange enough. All of the neighbors waving, everyone acting so polite when they usually avoided her. But today, as she left the neighborhood and went into the city, she noticed something far stranger. She noticed a fleeting nostalgia. No, it wasn't nostalgia. It was a warp to the past. She noticed Jake, Nicole, and Clarissa, their faces seemingly copied onto every person who walked down the street. Man, woman, child, didn't matter, as their faces were all she saw. Florence shook her head. I must just have them on my mind. I didn't even go to that Christmas party. Or did I? They weren't even there, though. She rubbed her temple. Oh my God. They were there. They stopped me when I left. There's no way. No way they could have looked just like I saw them then. Just like I saw them now. It must have been a dream. Yeah, that must be the explanation. Where am I even driving? What am I even doing? I could be at home right now doing nothing. Nothing like I usually do. Forgetting the past that I wish never happened. Florence didn't speed this time, but she tried to get away from it all. Why did my house look like that before? That couldn't be right. It's not like that flask got me drunk at all. It's not like I was hallucinating. There's no way it even still exists. I'm gonna try and find it again. Florence drove to the road that her gym used to be on. She pulled up to it, so decrepit that there weren't even working parking meters. Florence drove to the road that her gym used to be on. She pulled up to it, so decrepit that there weren't even working parking meters in front of it. Only cinder blocks that looked down into a shoddily crafted foundation remains. It's even more torn down than I remember, she said, getting out of the car. The wind blew through her hair as she walked up toward the wooden doors, opening them as they had remained unlocked for countless years, a number at this point that she would rather forget. She walked inside the dark, hallowed hall of her once famous mausoleum. Old black and white photos covered in dust were strewn along the wall. Each one carried a memory of years past, dating back decades. Amongst those photos were brandishings of graffiti on the wall, stains of what she could only assume were vomit and piss, and broken bottles of the cheapest of booze. It was apparent that the only thing this building had seen in quite some time was the partying of teenage hoodlums, and maybe a place to crash and tweak out for the lowlives. She caressed the walls in search for a light switch. For some reason, there's no possible way that the electricity could still be running, yet, just perhaps, she pressed the switch, and all at once, the fluorescent bulbs lining the entire ceiling flickered, one after another, in a long, drawn-out moan. Florence reached in her pocket for a cigarette. Pulling out her pack, she noticed that it was unfortunately empty. Well, there's gotta be something left over. She started to pervade the floor around her. Her eyes continued to scan. Ha! I knew it. She picked up a half-burnt, half-crushed joint from the ground, Bringing it to her nose, she gave it a whiff. Nothing too spectacular, but it'll definitely do the job. She pulled out her lighter, took it to her lips, tried to rebend so it was straight, lit it up, and then took a deep inhale, holding on to the white and somewhat ashy fume as it swirled around her mind. It tasted like shit, but at least it seemed like it might not be stale. She exhaled the smoke and sighed. Ah, with a small cough. Florence, you've still got it. Taking a couple more puffs, she finally started looking around the rest of the hallway. She continued to walk down. Wow, this place is shitty. But maybe it was always shitty. She took another drag off that joint. At this point, it was starting to burn her forefinger, and she threw it on the linoleum floor. She went into the main gym. Decently sized room. It's funny, but after all they had been through together, they didn't even have the courtesy to ask if she wanted any of the equipment or the money, being as the gym was completely void of all equipment and the famed ring. She instinctively went into the corner where her prized square Sandy used to be and was supposed to be. It was hers after all. Everything in that damn gym was. She chuckled to herself, remembering that she passive-aggressively named the ring after a bookish girl she used to torment in school. She slumped down against the peeling lead paint against the wall and crossed her legs and put her elbows on her knees. She closed her eyes for a moment. Her mind began to feel a bit foggy. In fact, her mouth tasted a little weird too, as she felt her lips caking up. Thinking to herself that the joint did taste quite stale, but it had an off flavor about it for being who knows how old. She closed her eyes again, but when she opened them, she was standing up. The entire gym lit up with people whirring out and training below the ring as it was all those years ago. She looked around. What the fuck is going on? She was looking all around, but that's when she heard the unforgettable ding. Before she could look up, she saw a slightly familiar but also forgettable face coming right at her. A woman's mouth guard hiding her grinning smile as she took a punch to the stomach. Still out of it, she looked down at her arms. They were young and more muscular, just like they had been in the past. While she was looking down, she received another hit to the jaw, and then to the cheek, and before she knew it, she was down, looking up at the glaring fluorescent lights, and she heard the referee counting. Felt like she could barely move, her mind racing, not knowing what had happened. She thought, I'm a boxer, goddammit! But as soon as that thought was done, she was down for the count, and told to leave the ring. She rolled out of the ring. Instead of walking out, she fell on her face again. She saw Jake and Nicole standing above her. Are you alright? Jake asked. You've never gotten knocked out like that before. It's like you didn't even try. She closed her eyes again, and when she opened them, she was panting in the back in that dark, empty room. She remembered that was the fight that changed everything. Or at least that's how she remembered it. She stood up in a fluster. I need to get the fuck out of here. Storming out of the gym, it started to blizzard. Oh, great. Her mind felt like mush. She didn't want to drive, let alone scrape off the car. She knew that in New Jersey, she should always keep the snow scraper in the car, but for some reason she didn't have one. So she leaned over her car and wiped the windows with her sleeve as best she could before getting in. She didn't even know how much time had passed since she entered the gym. When she turned on her car, the engine sputtered a few times, but luckily, the time read 5 hours later. She tried to back up, but realized her car was completely snowed in. Looking at the road, even for Jersey, this was an intense blizzard. It looked like the snowfall had already reached 1.5 feet. No one is going to be driving right now. She slammed the wheel. Shit, shit, shit. I guess I'm staying out tonight. She contemplated sleeping in the gym, but she would probably feel warmer and safer in her car, so she decided to bundle up and stay in the back seat until morning. Despite the blanket and the warm winter coat covering her, she shivered endlessly through the night. Dreams, images of her husband and the other three, whom which she hoped to forget, riddled her subconscious. When she awoke, she was where her treasured boxing ring used to be. Did I walk in while I was asleep? Or did I never even make it to the car? Picking herself up, she slowly walked towards the hallway. Out of instinct, she grabbed for the pack of cigs in her pocket. The fuck? 5 left? I think I would have remembered that. Wouldn't have grabbed some trash hobo spliff otherwise. Lighting one, she walked down the hallway toward the entrance. The light she distinctively remembered turning on was off, and the only light she could see was the sunlight peeping through the frosted glass of the entry door. Once outside, she looked back at the building. So many years, Robert. She let out a sigh and threw her cigarette in the snow and entered her car. Jamming the key in and hitting the dashboard, the car jerked to life. Although she didn't remember turning the radio, she never listened to that trash anyway. It seemed to be tuned in on the local channel. Another cold Jersey day. Due to the ice and snow, all inhabitants are encouraged to stay indoors. In other more shocking news, one of our major pillars of the community, Clarissa Newhart, has been found dead inside her home. The cause of death is still unknown, and local police have refused to comment at this time. Hearts go out to Clarissa and her extended family, and we only know that her integral part in this town's brethren can be replaced before too long. Florence turned off the radio and shook her head. That's odd. I know she was an old bag, but I figured she had another good 7 to 10 years left on her. She paused for a moment and flashed back to a few days ago, when she had seen her face littering every corner of the town. I did go to that Christmas party, didn't I? Even if my mind was playing tricks on me while I was driving around town, surely that was her when I was at the community center. For heaven's sake, she acted like she knew who I was. She paused again. The newscaster continuing his broadcast, but the sound never made it to her ears. Were any of them at the community center? If she died, was that the real Clarissa that I had seen? Were any of them real? For now, before getting into anything deeper, she simply wanted to drive home and blow off some steam, passing by all of the town's cherished buildings. A hush seemed to echo like wildfire based on the storm. It was understandable that nobody was in the streets, and yet something felt off. The blizzard hadn't filled the town with more snow than the previous days, meaning that footprints and tire tracks would remain somewhat visible. Yet for some reason, not a single tire tread, nor a single solitary footprint could be found in any inch of the town. And with this weather, it must have been a snow day for schools. She rolled down her window and didn't hear one child outside enjoying the snow like they always do. This just doesn't seem to add up. As she made her way towards her home, she once again saw the flashing blue and red lights of a cop car, but this time they were in front of her and off the beaten path. She slowed her car as she passed the sheriff's cruiser, adrift inside a snowbank with no driver to be seen. Stupid cop. Must have gone out to patrol on foot and forgot to turn the lights off. She shook her head. She finally got to her driveway and sighed, thankful that the sheriff didn't catch her again. She closed her door and pulled out the tarp from the back seat of the car and put it over. Before walking up her steps and opening the door, putting her hand on the freezing cold handle, almost making her jolt back, when she got inside, she sighed a heavy sigh of relief and locked the door behind her in her usual manner. She never understood how there were so many people in this city who left their doors unlocked. She took off her coat and already had a t-shirt underneath, so she just decided to take off her pants and slip into some gym shorts that were already laying on top of the dresser in her bedroom on the way to the garage. She put her hand on the doorknob to the garage, which was almost just as cold as the entryway, and then opened it. It was pitch black, so she left the door at the top of the stairs open, making her way to the middle of the garage. She pulled the chain to the light. This time it turned on, though it flickered every few seconds. Damn, I guess this house is pretty old. Must be a shoddy fuse. Ugh. I can deal with it, though. She put her hair up in a ponytail and went over to the outdated boombox radio and slid in one of her favorite workout cassette mixes. She smiled, remembering that Nicole had helped her make this mix, then shook her head. Whatever. She didn't bother to wrap her hands. She just needed to blow off some steam. She'd probably just be abusing this worn-out, duct-taped workout bag for 5 or 10 minutes anyway. She stood in front of the bag, trying to forget everything, took a few swings at it. No matter how hard she tried to forget what she saw last night, she just couldn't forget that fight. The fight that seemed to send her life spiraling downward. Hell, it wasn't even a fight. It was a sparring match. But she let her pride get in the way. She never had lost before. Never let her guard down that easily. She knew it wasn't whatever she had consumed last night that made her remember it like that. So why did it happen like that? She punched the bag harder and harder, some of the tape wrinkling at the edges where she hit it. The music seemed to fade out as she thought more and more about it, about how she felt that actual day. She felt like the world was spinning around her, and that she couldn't control a thing, as she was used to. Before she knew it, she grabbed the bag to stop it from swinging, and the sound around her came back, but it wasn't her tape. Once again, it was that goddamn radio. This is a very solemn day. This might come as a shock to many of you, but sometime between 4 and 7 this morning, Sheriff Rosenthal was found dragged from his car and bludgeoned to death. His wallet was the only thing that was taken from him. We believe it might be one of two assailants. We will keep you informed on this loss. We at NRM 103 are very sorry that the public has to deal with all these losses on what's supposed to be a joyous time. The radio sputtered out and continued playing her cassette as if it had never stopped. She started punching the bag again, the light still flickering, even faster now, like it was matching up with her blows. God damn it. What's wrong with this city? It's probably some goddamn junkies who just kills a sheriff for nothing more than a wallet. Probably didn't even have more than some overdue credit cards in there anyway. Can't believe I saw his cruiser. Wonder how close his body was. She tried to stop and go back upstairs. She was done thinking for now. The last 24 hours had been far too much for her. She wanted to pull the string on the light again, but the damn thing didn't turn off. She just walked away and walked up those stairs, slamming the garage door behind her. She went into the living room and drew all the curtains, and flopped down on the couch, happy to be somewhere warm after the frigid night she had had, and then started to doze off. Florence jolted up from the couch as the sound of ringing filled her ears. It took her a moment to grasp her bearings, but then grabbed at the phone, realizing that's where the sound was coming from. "Hello?" she said, somewhat and annoyed. "Yes, Miss Viola?" Her silence spurred the caller to continue their speech. "I'm calling yet again in regards to the situation with the platinum bandages gym. As I said before, it seems as though there's still activity inside of your gym. Regular training schedules, utility services, and equipment costs continue to fill the pages of our financial books. Do you have any information regarding this? Or any plans to stop these financial recordings?" Infuriated, Florence responded. "I've told you time and time again. The building shut down. Nobody is practicing anything. There's not even any equipment in the building." She paused for a moment and remembered the odd occurrence of the lights turning on when she last visited. Shaking her head, she continued, "I'm sick and tired of telling you people this, and if I get a fucking bill, I'm gonna take you to court and sue all your asses. Don't bother me again." And with that, she hung up the phone. She was breathing heavily, and without even thinking too straight, she marched her way into the garage, whose light was still on. She paced up to the bag, reeling her arm back furiously, releasing all of her tension onto it. A loud crack rung in her ears. Looking around, there was nothing to be seen, and rightly so. Florence knew exactly where the sound of that kind of crack would have come from. Too many injuries in the gym had marked that sound in her memory. She looked up to the bag, and for some reason, it had an indent on its surface. Through squinted eyes, she could swear she saw something inside of the bag. The next thing that caught her attention was a dripping noise that seemed to ring through the cold, echoey morgue of her garage. Looking down, she noticed that blood seemed to be dripping from the bottom of the bag itself. She looked all around the room for something to rip the bag open with. The moment her eyes locked with a spade sitting in the corner. She quickly picked it up, plunged it into the top of the bag, and ripped it halfway down. Dropping it on the floor, she grasped the two sides open, revealing what was inside. Her mouth dropped, and although she wanted to, no scream escaped her lips. Florence sat up on the couch, panting. She held her chest for a moment and drew in as much breath as she could, trying to regain her balance and focused. She grabbed at a pack of cigs sitting on the table and yanked one out, stuffed it in her mouth, and lit it up in an uncomfortable motion. She didn't notice it originally, but as she exhaled, she noticed that there was some semi-fresh blood on her knuckles. Without stopping her cigarette, she made her way to the garage. Light was still on, spade was still in the corner, and the bag was still intact. Nothing looked outside the norm. She looked cautiously, walked to the bag, and felt it. It felt like it always did. She pulled the cigarette out of her mouth and held it in her hand, and with a slightly cautious action, pulled her right arm back and punched into the middle of the bag. Without thinking about the blood she had previously seen on her hand, she felt a slight sting ring through the open wounds on her knuckles. Other than that, there was nothing odd. No sound of bones cracking, no feeling other than a cold, lifeless, broken punching bag. She walked back into the house, slightly in shock, leaving the door to the garage behind her open. As soon as she sat back down on the couch, her phone rang. She picked it up and said nothing. "Hello? Miss Viola, I called the other day regarding your gym." Without letting him continue, she immediately hung up the phone. Following the cord to where it met the wall, she pulled it out so she would no longer be disturbed. Florence pulled out another cigarette, lit it up, closing her eyes as she laid back against the couch, sitting upright this time so she wouldn't fall asleep. Enjoying her quiet, smoky meditation, she did all she could to forget all that had transpired these last few days. She was too frazzled to even relax. It felt like her brain was sitting on pins and needles. She stood up and stomped over to her light green Circuit 60s fridge and got a cold, frosty beer. She uncapped the glass bottle and watched the condensation trickle down the outside of it. Only after a swig or two, she heard the annoying rapping of someone knocking on her door. Rolling her eyes, "Ugh, just can't get a break." It was almost like an out-of-body experience as she was walking to the door. These last few days felt almost like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. It seemed like nothing she did was in her control, and every experience was dictated by the actions of other people. She opened the door after pausing cautiously for a moment. She saw her neighbor's joyful face. "Hi, Florence!" rung the annoyingly familiar sound of Larry's voice. He was holding a foil-covered platter. "Mind if I come in?" Without even a response, he pushed his way into the house, still smiling. Florence thought that he must have no self-awareness of proper social norms. Regardless, she closed the door behind her. "What are you doing here?" "Well, I haven't seen you go out lately," he bashfully said. "I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a snoop around the neighborhood, but I was thinking if you haven't gone out, you probably haven't gotten any groceries, and you're probably hungry. With that thought in mind, I made you this green bean casserole." He pulled up the foil, revealing that putrid slime that he was trying to pass off as food, and extended it out towards Florence with a hearty grin on his face. She looked him up and down without grabbing the tray. I'll just put this on the counter," he said awkwardly as he unabashedly made his way into her kitchen. He made himself right at home and opened the fridge. "Oh wow, there really is nothing in here." That didn't stop him from grabbing a beer. "Hey, is this gluten-free?" Florence rolled her eyes, not responding. He let out a nervous laugh. "It's okay, it's my cheat day anyway." And with a swift motion removed the top and took a hearty chug with an overwhelmingly unpleasant after swallowing. There was an awkward silence, and he started rummaging through her cabinets, getting 2 plates out and serving a heaping spatula of the casserole onto both of them. "It's still warm. I just made it. Doesn't need to be reheated or anything. Come on, eat up. Let's enjoy these brews and this casserole and have a chat. Can't think of the last time we did such a thing together." Florence pulled up a bar stool, thinking, "Yeah, that's because you're an annoying prick." She took a bite of the meal in front of her, thinking the quicker she finished the plate, the quicker Larry would leave. "I know this town isn't the safest, but I can't believe everything that's been going on lately. What with the sheriff and Clarissa, I've never felt so uneasy. I guess that's why I wanted someone to talk to. Believe it or not, it seems like so many of the neighbors ignore me," he said with a mouthful of casserole, spitting some of it onto the counter as he spoke. Florence paused. "Oh, I'm sorry. I know you and Clarissa have quite a past together. I didn't mean to bring it up. It's just that she's always been so kind to me, and it really hurts my heart to see her gone, especially under such an unknown circumstance. But anyway," he paused, took another bite, and didn't continue. Florence took a long swig of her beer, the only escape from this prison. Florence took a long swig of her beer, the only escape from this poison. "Unknown circumstances, my ass," she said under her breath. Larry didn't respond, just looked wide-eyed in shock, and then she continued. "Let's just say Clarissa rubbed elbows with the wrong people. Maybe it finally came back to bite her in the ass." With that, she started chugging the rest of her beer. The sound of her empty bottle hitting the countertop was the only thing that broke the empty silence. "Well, I guess I should get going. I still have some things left to do around the house. You know how mad Margaret will get if I don't finish those chores." He laughed awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. "Well, I guess you don't really know, but she's a stickler for, well, everything. She even told me I shouldn't come over here, but I figured you needed the company." Florence rolled her eyes, but was happy she only had to take 2 bites of that awful goop before he left. Once out the door, she threw the rest of his disgusting casserole away. "The things I have to put up with in this fucking town." She opened the fridge again and grabbed another beer. "The only thing in this world that will wash down that horrible mess disguised as food." She made her way upstairs, passing her bedroom, and entered her husband's old study. The simple, bulky, yet somehow operational desktop was pronouncedly placed on the desk in front portion of the room, in front of a window looking out onto the snowy field. Pressing the power button, the computer greeted her with the annoying startup sound of a mechanism no longer used. It took minutes for it to officially boot up, and another couple minutes to connect to her archaic internet connection. Once connected, she brought up the old and familiar web browser, searched for Clarissa's name to see if there was any current news on her recent death. She scrolled past the many pages documenting her accolades and work within the community. Scrolled past the event link stating that her funeral would be taking place within the next 3 days. She opened 2 pages dedicated to the open case involving her death. As with all internet news sources, they said nothing new, and in fact, seemed to mirror one another in the information given. Every article seemed like it was copied from the previous one. I guess that's journalism these days. She sat back against the chair and closed her eyes for a moment as she let out a sigh. The ping of a notification brought her back. An email? She thought. Clicking on the old mail icon, she was greeted with what seemed to be over 30 unread messages, each from the same handler, J.S. Cantor. Cantor. That name sounds familiar. Without reading any of the previous messages, she clicked on the newest one. Trouble strikes in Tunrick Grove. The title read, Dear Robert, I hope this message finds you well. Surely you've heard the recent occurrences in the town. As we have both discussed before, this is no surprise. Rosenthal, Unia, the others are soon to follow. The message spaced down quite a few paragraphs before continuing. Breakfast before botany, botany before blasphemy, blasphemy, the reward of kings. The message dropped down one line and simply ended with, Yours, Cantor. The fuck? She reread the message, although there wasn't much to read, and sat confused for a few minutes. Florence went back to the inbox page and scanned all the unread messages. This is gonna take a while. She was gonna reach for a cig when she remembered that her husband always left his box of cigars in the top drawer of the weathered pine desk. Opening the drawer, she saw the dust-covered humidifier that contained his prized cigars. Picking it up, she blew the dust off from the top and then opened it. The smell of fresh cigars filled her nostrils. Everything else might have been weathered and old, even herself, but these cigars remained perfectly aged.
Stop. Oh my god.
She picked up a cigar and unwrapped it from its plastic. Looking at the intricate paisley design wrapping, she took it out her lighter and started to puff as she lit. It had been well over a decade since she had a cigar. She was always good at smoking them, never understood people who didn't inhale the rich aroma of every unique cigar they put to their lips. Before letting her mind wander too far, she got back to the task at hand. She scrolled down to an email halfway down the list. It was dated 5 months ago. The weirdest thing about all of these emails is that they had no response, even though this Cantor person was sending them every week, if not multiple times a week. The title read, Time is an idea, but like all ideas, it must be claimed. We've made great progress. There's still so much to do. With the election around the corner, the right ideals are what the public wants. No, needs. We both know what we're doing is righteous work, and for the greater good. You will be accepted if you keep following all of our orders. You will live a life previously unimaginable. Again, the message dropped down and ended with, Yours, Cantor. She fervently scrolled down through the other messages. One with the title, Trouble, was dated a month ago. She apprehensively clicked it. You were right in your worries. I thought that what we were doing would benefit this community, but it seems like they're blocking me out and hiding crucial information from me. And from what I've heard, they don't like that I've brought you into all this. I'd watch your back if I was you. I know you've been watching your back for years, but I think the truth might come out if we're both not careful. I'm gonna lay low for now, but it seems like there are eyes on me everywhere I go. This is probably all I should say for now. It's creepy feeling like even in my own home, there might be people surveying me. She flicked the long ash of the cigar into a crystal ash bowl, shaking her head. Is this some kind of spam email? Seems like none of it makes any sense. Between the email she just read and the next one, there was a 3-week gap which seemed out of character for whoever this J.S. Castor was. They usually sent an email every week. Spam or not, this can have to do with my husband's email. Even if they did mention people in town, it has to be a mix-up. Obviously, he hasn't gotten back to any of these messages, and for fuck's sake, he's dead. She did some more snooping in the emails, but all of them seemed to be practically gibberish, talking about plans, community, and how everything could change. Though the tone after the trouble email did take a shift, like the composer was worried, frantic, almost paranoid. That's when he started talking in code, saying things like, "Where the red eye rises," and "Tourniquet of thy sin." He made absolutely no sense. Flustered, Florence rubbed her temple and continued smoking the fragrant aged cigar until it was down to its nub. It took a few hours, but she didn't have anywhere to be. "I need to get out of here." She stood up, went to her bedroom, and threw on a sweater and some sweatpants, and made a decision to go on a walk. The sun was setting on a crisp winter evening as she walked down her driveway and outside of her property. The emails flooded her brain. Confusion, anger. She wasn't really sure what to feel. The earliest message, from what she could gather at the present time, had come in a full 2 years after her husband's passing. She could swear the name Castor was familiar, yet she could place it nowhere in her memory. The winds were mellow and yet icy. Her footprints dug deep in the snow, leaving a single trail behind her. Red eye? Tourniquet of sin? The words rolled around her mind as she walked in a daze. Before long, she had made it 1.5 miles and had reached the edge of a lake. The orange hue of the sun danced off of the ice-covered water. She looked to her right and noticed an old bench. Walking up to it, and before sitting down, she read the small plaque dedicated to her late husband, Henry Viola. A marvel among men, a pillar of the community, king of the ring. She sighed and sat down against the bench. In the years since his passing, Florence had gone through all sorts of turmoil, and not just emotional. She was lucky the money he had left her had helped keep her habits and lifestyle funded. Even more lucky that the profits from the gym had been able to pay off the house years before his death. He was a good man, quiet, reserved, yet strong of will, and a true gentleman. He never troubled her with anything more than she could bear, and yet always leaned on to her for the support that he needed. Or was that even true? She pulled out a cig and lit it, watching the smoke rise on the cold, still winter air. The thought of Castor mulled over in her mind as she smoked it down. As sometimes happens, her fingers seemed to give up on her, and she dropped her cig on the ground. Shit! She bent down to grasp it. Somehow, luckily, still alight, and noticed a dead plant peeking up from the snow beside the bench. Where have I seen that before? She sat staring at it for a moment, taking its dead leaves, its withered stalk. Suddenly, a memory crushed over her. Florence, have I ever told you about this flower? The name escaped the memory. It's a wondrous specimen. Its smell is subtle, yet comforting. Its stalk strong, yet singular. You might find multiples growing in the same area, but never a branching stalk on a single plant. It has a long cycle, and grows from the beginning of spring to the end of fall. At that point, its bud withers and dies, but its stalk remains the same, hard, almost mummified, and yet at the same time, it seems as though it's suspended in its own time, waiting for spring to come again. Florence rolled her eyes, not responding. Henry continued. Though it's not its peculiar growth cycle that it's most interesting, it's the properties that it contains. A single flower, either the bud or the seeds that it produces, is regarded by any botanist to be a true wonder. Some say it has anti-aging properties, while others say it can make you feel true euphoria. Florence laughed. So it gets you high? Henry laughed, a big, full-bodied, hearty laugh. I suppose you could say that's true. Of course, only some supposedly know how to extract its properties, while others just say it's a myth and a legend. Either way, I find this flower both beautiful and intriguing nonetheless. Sick of taking a useless trip down memory lane, Florence stood up and aimlessly walked in the middle of her idyllic town center. It was a fresh breath of relief seeing people out and about getting ready for the new year. Come to think of it, she hadn't taken a walk down Main Street in years. The pressure to greet and be polite to everyone was always a burden to her, but luckily enough today it seemed as though she slipped through everyone's radar. They were all too busy with the holidays' festivities. It's funny, she thought. At a time of year when everyone is pretending to care about their fellow man, they're too absorbed in themselves to notice anyone else. I guess that's the real reason everyone loves this holiday. Self-absorption. She enjoyed her walk with small snowflakes falling from the sky, passed by a window to a small diner that was strangely full of people. She looked at her watch. Even though it was dinner time, she didn't know this many people in town went out to eat, especially during the holidays. That's when she saw a potted plant in the window. It was the same plant that was near the lake, same plant her husband told her about, and all the memories of what it truly meant flooded back to her. Without thinking, she swung open the diner door. Everything went silent. All conversations stopped. Everyone put their forks down, and it seemed they were all fixated on her entrance. The greeter came up to her in a light yellow dress and white apron. "Hi, Florence. As you can see, our restaurant is very packed right now. It might be best if you come back at another time, unless you're with the Castor party." Florence backed away. She had never seen this woman in her life, let alone gone to this diner. How the hell did they know her name? And why did the name Castor keep coming up everywhere she turned? She grabbed the young brunette by her shoulders, gripping harshly. "Who the hell is Castor?" Nonchalantly, she removed Florence's hands from her shoulders and smiled. "Well, I'm sorry. If you don't know who he is, then we don't have a seat for you here." Florence backed away, against the doors, and ran out. She pulled up the hood of her coat and started walking briskly down the street. What is going on in this town? A vague sense of dread washed over her as she saw everyone acting normal. Too normal. It was unsettling to see everyone going about their gift shopping and sightseeing. Or maybe it was just her. Maybe she was the abnormal one. She shook her head, knowing that something was out of place, that something was wrong. What the fuck was all that about? She felt as though there were eyes watching her from every angle, and when she looked up, she could see people staring at her, pointing at her, and whispering. No. I must just be paranoid. But she couldn't just help kicking the feeling that everyone knew where she was and where she was going. She started to speed walk, and then that turned into a run on the icy sidewalks. She found herself dodging into an alleyway with no one around. Out of breath and her throat dry with winter air, she caught her breath. Fortunately, due to her daily workouts, it didn't take long for her heart rate and breathing to reach their normal momentum. I'm not crazy, right? They were all staring, and some of them were following me, right? The alley was dead quiet. No hobos, no rats, just dead. I guess they really cleaned up this town. Looking around, she noticed that she had actually gone in somewhat of a circle. The door directly in front of her ended up being the diner's back door. Its name was even posted upon it as such. She paused, and then, in a moment of spontaneity, she reached for the handle to see if it was unlocked. Much to her surprise, it opened. She walked inside, making sure to close the door quietly behind her. Florence noticed the many bags of onions and produce around the door before slowly making her way into the kitchen. Oddly enough, it looked as though there weren't any cooks, or even traces that there had been in the room at that time. This intrigued her, so she decided to look a little closer. All of the griddles were off, and no hint of oil was on their surface. Nothing. There seemed to be nothing in any inch of the room that made it appear that food was ever prepared here. Much like your typical diner, it had an open spot which she crouched down and walked up to so as not to be seen. She took in a deep breath and then slowly creeped her head over the counter. Every booth was still full, and everyone continued to eat. Every plate was filled with food. She had no idea where it had come from, and it didn't seem like any plate had a dent in it whatsoever. She tried to hone her hearing, wondering if she could make out anything from these people's conversations. Aside from a few key words such as the game, holidays, and family, it seemed as though they were all talking gibberish. In fact, the more she listened, it seemed as though the conversations repeated every couple of minutes. Florence quickly ducked down as the waitress she had seen earlier turned in her direction. She stayed slumped against the back of the counter, noticed a box of beer next to her, and hoped that it at least had something inside of it. Opening it quietly, she was pleased to find an entirely filled box. Not a big fan of warm beer, but at least it's something. She quickly opened a bottle and began downing it as though it was her last. She placed the empty bottle to the side and decided to grab another. She made her way through her second bottle. She heard the ding on the diner door. It didn't immediately grab her attention until she heard the waitress say the familiar and somewhat canned-sounding monologue that she had given her earlier. She could make out what was said in response, but the peppy waitress's voice was heard saying, "Oh, well then come this way." Her interest piqued. She again creeped over the counter as a white-haired man in a trench coat walked towards the booth out of She again creeped over the counter as a white-haired man in a trench coat walked toward a booth out of view. She couldn't make out his face, but she had some idea of who he was. For the next 10 minutes, as she sat, making her way through the beer, nothing of note was heard by her ears. No one entered, no one left, and the conversation remained the same. That is, until the diner phone rang. She scrambled along the floor. Being as the phone was right above the service counter, she didn't want to be seen as the waitress made her way to the wall-mounted phone. She didn't even say hello, only responded a few moments of silence with, "All right, I'll tell him." She hung up and greeted the white-haired man that had walked in a few minutes prior. "I'm sorry, sir, but he won't be able to make it to today's meeting." She turned quickly and went back to hovering over the other patrons. With that, the man readjusted his hat and quickly left through the front doors. As soon as the bell on the door rang, as he left, all of the other customers in the establishment looked up and fell silent. One by one, they all methodically stood up and exited the building as well. Only the waitress was left in the building, and she turned around almost robotically after locking the front door and switching off the lights. Florence knew she was going to leave through the back entrance and quickly hid inside a kitchen shelf. She heard the door to the kitchen open and held her breath. Peering out of the cabinet, she saw the young woman looking down at the box of beers that had 2 bottles missing. But she shrugged her shoulders and put the case in the fridge before locking up the back door and leaving through it. Florence let out a relieved sigh and made her way out of the cabinet, cracking her back as she stood up. Damn, that was a tight squeeze. She shook her head, feeling like all of this was a dream, and opened up the fridge to take a third beer for the road. She opened the back door to the diner and looked out cautiously, making sure there was no one in view, before sneaking out and making her way down the alleyway. Walking out into the street, she noticed it was a quiet day, almost like a few days ago. There were few people out, but something seemed strangely stagnant with everyone about town, or without everyone in town. She was starting to notice the little things. Intricate graffiti on the brick buildings. Had she not noticed these things before, or did they not appear until recently? A car came speeding down the road, and they yelled something unintelligible as their car sprayed a drift of snow into her direction. She was about to yell when she noticed that there was a paper bag at her feet that hadn't been there before. Intrigued, muttering, "God, I hope this ain't a bag of dog shit." She picked up the bag cautiously, looked inside. It was an odd assortment of items, along with a piece of paper. There was a thin syringe-style needle, one of those flowers that seem to be noticed everywhere today, and a note scribbled on the piece of paper saying, "You can't just dip your toes in the water without getting wet. You would have had it all then, but you expect to figure it out now? This town has outgrown you. Just like this flower was uprooted, the same thing will happen to you eventually." Florence looked around, seeing if there was anyone that was reacting to her receiving this package. But alas, the few people she saw were going about their normal day. If it wasn't for the event of the last few days, she wouldn't have thought twice about it, and would have thought it was just a couple of kids trying to pull off a cryptic and edgy prank on some old lady. At this point, however, she felt a little bit concerned, folded the piece of paper, and put it into her pocket, thinking perhaps it would come in handy at a later date. She threw the bag on the ground, the needle and the severed flower dropping against the ground as she walked away. Although the inside of her house was a different temperature from outside, it was still rather cold. She shivered for a moment and then walked through the hallway, past the living room, and opened the door to her backyard. Stepping out onto the wooden deck, she paused for a moment to take in the beautiful scenery. Large, bare, snow-covered trees that had grown through her life and her loving relationship with Henry. She remembered many a day and night spent on the back patio and in the yard, watching both the sunrise and the sunset and the passing of the seasons. "I think this is the longest I've spent out here in years. Whenever I finally punch my last ticket, I wonder if this house will die with me, or if anyone else will ever add memories to this beautiful spot of land." She paused for a moment. Fuck 'em. She looked down to her left into the tarp similar to the one covering her car. It was also sun-baked and weathered. She pulled it only part way to the side and grabbed a dry bundle of logs. "I'm really running low. I really need to go out and pick up more, or something, soon." Covering it again, she made her way back inside, an unsaid farewell to the backyard. Walking into the living room, she put the logs down by the fireplace and quickly made her way over to the kitchen. Opening the lower cabinet, she grabbed a stack of newspaper, a box of matches, and a tin of lighter fluid. Once back in the living room, she started to set up a humble fire in the gray and red brick fireplace. It took a few minutes for her kindling to light the logs, but once it did, it started to heat the house and would remain lit for the next couple of hours. She slumped against the couch and, per her habit, pulled out a cigarette and lit it. For the first half, she simply tried to decompress and enjoy, but then her mind went back to thinking. Okay, so that man in the diner had to have been Castor, I'm supposing. I don't know who else it could have been. Not that I really know what's going on, though. She puffed out a big plume and flicked a long ash that was close to falling. Obviously, it was a meeting of some sort, but what was it about? And why did everyone leave when he did? She blew out another plume and dug into her pocket to retrieve the note. Who wrote me this note? I highly doubt it was Castor. There's no reason to assume he even knew I was there. He couldn't see me, and all I saw was the back of his head. Still assuming that even was him. I guess someone had been watching my movements. Obviously, it's not Larry. He's about as dumb as they come. She chuckled. Pulling her knees up to her face, she hugged her legs, being comforted by the warm crackling of the fire. It felt almost like she was in shock, her mind whirring a million miles a minute, but at the same time, it felt like it was shutting down and couldn't think of one coherent thought. She closed her eyes, relaxing, when all of a sudden the most jarring, intrusive sounds her eardrum had ever been subjected to started blaring. It made her jump, looking all around the room. That doesn't sound like any kind of smoke detector. What is it? She walked around her house and noticed that the closer she got to the study, the louder it got. She opened the glass-pane doors of the study and saw that the computer monitor was flashing. She ran over to the outdated speakers and hastily unplugged them, the sound still emanating from the computer, but garbled and much lower. She sighed. Her heart seemed to be beating so fast from the abrasive noise. She looked at the computer screen and moved the mouse. As she did so, the screen stopped flashing white and red, as it had been, and there was a new message, notification, whatever the hell you want to call it. Florence didn't care too much for technological terminology between emails and messages and notifications, but that's beside the point. She clicked on the message from none other than J.S. Castor. I knew this would happen. There's a point where you either have to uproot or plant yourself. You can't have the best of both worlds. This is the code red I've been telling you about for so long. That's all I can say for now. The train is on full steam. Her heart rate went up again, not even knowing what the message meant. Even an idiot could piece together that she, or someone, was in trouble. And why were all of these emails sent to Henry's email address? She put her hands on the desk and pushed herself away as she was still sitting in the chair, panting, not knowing why or how all of this was even happening. At the exact moment, another message came through simply saying, if you want to keep above water, find a more shallow pool. She looked at the screen, racking her brain. What the fuck is this guy on? Sometimes it seems like he makes a little bit of sense, and then other times he sounds fucking batshit crazy. She closed the messages, probably overthinking all of this. This is 2019 after all. The email has probably been sold to 1,000 scammers. Maybe it's just an eerie coincidence. She felt sweat on her forehead, even though she tried to convince herself there was something wrong with this situation, and she knew it. Deep down, she knew nothing was right with these messages. In the town, the phone calls, and most unsettling, the constant feeling of being followed. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Not even a moment later, there was a violent rapping on her front door. Already on edge, adrenaline kicked in and she stomped to her front hallway without even thinking. She unlocked the doorknob and swung it open. It was her most frequented neighbor on her porch, good old Larry. He looked up at her, tears in his eyes, sweat dripping down his flushed face. He almost hiccuped on his words. Florence, it's really bad. I have to talk to you. It's urgent. Her eyes widened, and she stepped back and slammed the door in his face. Her mind was going 1,000 different directions. What the hell is he talking about? He couldn't come over right now at this time without knowing something. He kept banging on the door over and over. She could hear him pathetically weeping on the other side. I'm so sorry, Florence. I'm sorry I lied to you. I lied about everything. She stood up in a panic and swung the door open again. What the hell do you people want? I've been living this lie for longer than I can ever remember. I've been trying to act like everything is normal, but it's not. Before she even had a moment to respond, he rushed forward and wrapped his arms under hers, burying his face in her chest. He spoke for a few seconds inaudibly as he pressed against her sweater, and also was sobbing. He pulled his face away. It's Margaret. I've been lying to everyone. I've made up every excuse to explain why she hasn't been around, but the truth is... She saw his eyes well up. She left me. Florence was taken aback. What? Didn't you say she was home earlier? As usual, Larry pushed himself past Florence and slumped himself down on her couch. It's true. I just keep making up different lies to everyone. I've told some neighbors she's out of town, some that she's sick or busy, but she left. She left months ago. That's why I came over with that casserole. I needed someone to talk to. I mean, you're, well, lonely, I would guess. I never thought she'd leave me. I knew I could never trust her around that Brian. It seemed like he was almost hyperventilating with this confession. Florence slowly approached him, not exactly knowing how to console her slightly dim-witted neighbor, as she awkwardly patted his back. And I know the green bean casserole was horrible. That's because I made it. I can't do anything right. In the midst of trying to comfort him, a feeling rose over her. She tried to suppress it, but before long there was nothing she could do. Florence let out a loud, hearty, and uncontrollable laugh. She laughed and laughed and laughed. Her awkward rubbing of Larry's back turned to slapping as her whole body was in on the joke. What's so funny? he asked, tears still in his eyes with a mortified look on his face. She continued laughing for a moment, then wiped a tear from her eye, letting out a long sigh before finally stopping, a smile on her face. Nothing. Everything. You wouldn't understand. I'll get you a beer. She walked off to the kitchen, finally feeling some semblance of normalcy. With everything that was going on, it seemed like she hadn't had a down moment in such a long time. So much chaos that Larry's simple problems made everything feel just a little bit lighter. She let out another chuckle while she opened the fridge and grabbed 2 glass-bottled beers. We all knew she'd leave him eventually. He was lucky to have while he did. Hell, there ain't no Brian. Walking over to Larry, she plopped down on the couch next to him, twisted the bottle caps off, and handed him the beer. If this ain't good enough, I've got some whiskey somewhere, I'm sure. He grabbed it sheepishly, shivering like a little child, and then spoke through whimpers. Thanks, Florence. You're a good friend. She rolled her eyes. Don't be getting any ideas. I just don't want you killing yourself because I sent you off too quickly. She nudged him with her elbow and smiled. It felt like she hadn't done that in a while. Don't get me wrong, I hate Larry, more than pretty much any neighbor in the entire world could ever be hated, but hell, drinking with a whimpering, defeated Larry is exactly what the doctor ordered. She looked on her coffee table and spied at the television remote. Turning on the TV, it lit up with some stupid classic Christmas special. Although Florence hated these kinds of specials, she knew it would keep Larry down in the dumps, and thus more entertaining and distracting to her overfilled brain. The hours seemed to pass quickly and easily. Eventually they had created quite a stack of empty beer bottles. A jug of whiskey was on the table that had been drunk well through by Florence, as Larry had run to the bathroom and puked his guts up after one shot hours ago. His crying had stopped some time ago, though occasionally scenes from the special had let out whimpers from him like a balloon losing air. Okay, up and at 'em. You've already stayed longer than I've ever had you over, but you sure as hell ain't gonna stay at my house tonight. He looked up at her sheepishly and tired, his eyes swollen and puffy. But I'm so tired, and this couch is so comfortable, he stammered out. Florence shook her head. Won't be too comfortable with my foot up your ass. Neither of them said anything, but the look on Larry's face was one of childish fear. Now get. Don't fall asleep in my goddamn driveway either. He stood up with difficulty and made his way over to the door, stumbling and hitting the hallway walls on his way. She walked past him quicker and opened the door before he got there, as her tolerance for booze was much higher than his. He stumbled outside, nearly tipping over the stairs as he started to make his trek back. Without looking back, and while waving his hand in the air, he yelled out sloppily, Thanks, Florence! He dry heaved after saying that, but kept clumsily walking. She shook her head and closed the door. Hopefully that'll keep him away for at least a day. And hell, if he ends up dead, all we know is it will be because of his terrible alcohol tolerance, and not because he's involved in whatever the hell is going on in this town. She let out a yawn, and she finally realized how tired she was, the weight of the day finally catching up to her. She walked over to the couch, slumping down on it, finally on her own again. Her mind tried to bring thoughts of the strangeness going on, but Florence knew how to deal with that for right now. Nope, not gonna think about that. Let's just stuff it down with some brown. With that, she quickly filled up and downed 2 more shots of whiskey, lit a cigarette, and focused her tired eyes on the mind-numbing program playing on the TV. Before too long, she was fast asleep. The cig fell to the ground from her unmoving hand, and eventually burned out, leaving a trail of ash.
Okay, another drink. Dementia.
Florence woke up from her strangely long nap. It was already day. She noticed the blinding white light reflected off the snow cascading into her windows. She looked down to her left and noticed a sticky note on the ground. You're so close. It's like being back in the ring, isn't it? It read. Florence snatched it up. Her heart was racing, looking at that handwriting. It was unforgettable. It was his. She bolted up off the couch. Her eyes darted to another yellow square posted to the wall. If you really remember, you'll go to where this all started. She snatched it off the wall and crumpled it in her hand. What the fuck is going on? And yet again, there was another yellow sticky note. Come on. You love it when I'm like this, Violet. Florence looked around, seeing if there were any other notes on the ceiling, on the floor, on the baseboards, but there were none, except for one pasted on the front door. You know where to go. Don't pretend like you're an idiot. There was a crude smiley face drawn after that statement, which admittedly made her chuckle. She opened the door. They're also so cute. I love them.
Gotta drink for the OTP.
When I drink your own characters literally break you for a second. You're like, oh my god, that's like cute and fucking hilarious. Because you're like, this fucking bastard. And he's like, no, do that. Smile face. I also just said, don't think you're stupid. Like, ew.
I wrote this or I dictated this.
She opened the door quickly, walking to the destination she knew she was called to. She trudged through the thick, almost 5 inches of snow that was laid out before her. Avoiding her car, she thought she would walk this one. There seemed to be so many people on the street, in the middle of the road, on the sidewalks, even out on their balconies. Everyone smiling and waving to her. It was below freezing, probably about 17 degrees. Why are there so many people out? Neighbors and shop owners that she had barely ever acknowledged or said hello to, except maybe once or twice, were following her, stating, "Oh, where are you going today, Florence?" And "I would love to accompany you wherever you're going." She quickened her pace, but as she did, they did as well. Their stamps to the pavement seemed to increase every time she sped up. At this point, she knew she wasn't going to be able to visit where she intended. It seemed like the whole town was following her. What the hell am I supposed to do? I can't go there without them following me. Florence turned around and shouted, "Hey! You really want to know the truth about it all?" This caught the mob's attention. She waved her hand in a beckoning motion. "Come on, I'll show you." She started walking over to the park with the big frozen-over lake. When they arrived, she sat on the bench overlooking the lake and instructed everyone to stand on the frozen water. Without question, they all followed her instruction and made their way onto the middle of the lake. What do you people even want? They looked at each other and then back to her. One bakery owner, wearing a flowered-covered apron, finally spoke up. "We want the truth. That's what you promised us." After another unseen person in the back of the mob chimed in, "We want balance again," which was followed by another person yelling, "Yeah, we're sick of feeling tired. Things were better before." With silent tension, it was as thick as the fog evaporating off of the frozen lake. What do they mean? Florence thought to herself. Finally, someone spoke up and cut the tension. "Do you have it or not?" Again, Florence sat in confusion, and then spied the withered flower next to her. She stood up tall, and then bent down to pick it up, making sure to keep its image hidden from the crowd for the time being. She also noticed a large rock next to the flower. Standing up, she took in a deep breath, unsure what their next reaction would be. Turning around, she held it high for everyone to see. "Is this what you all want?" After one another, they all started yelling over each other. It wasn't much she could hear except for a few key phrases. "She has one! Are there any more? I can smell it from here! Look at how beautiful it is! It's in full bloom!" The last phrase stuck out at her as she looked at the withered plant in her hand. They're all fucking crazy. What do they see that I don't? As she finished her thought, she noticed the crowd slowly walking towards her, slowly clamoring and pushing those nearest them. "It's mine!" she heard one yell. As their pace quickened, Florence thought for only a moment, and then chucked the dried flower, with its dirt-encased roots still intact, as far as she could over the crowd and beyond the middle of the lake. Like flies to honey, They all redirected and flung their bodies towards the flower. With quick speed, Florence once again turned around, bent down, and with both hands grasped the boulder-like rock. Standing up and facing the lake, she mumbled one thing under her breath. "It's a good thing I don't have any attachments to this town." She then chucked the boulder as fast and high as she could onto the thinnest-looking part of the frozen lake. A loud thud, followed by many cracks, started a cataclysm on the lake deteriorating. Florence didn't even stay to see the outcome and immediately ran away. After she had made it half a mile away, she looked behind her for the first time, happy that nobody had followed her. She reached the fork that led in one direction to her house and the other towards the heart of town. "I think I need to grab a few things first." And she started walking in the direction of her house. There were a multitude of footprints leading up to and around her house that she had not noticed upon her quick leaving. So they've been watching me all day, I guess. Honestly, I don't know entirely what's going on. I don't know if the regular townsfolk do either. Either way, everyone is going insane. She tried the door handle and realized she hadn't locked it, even though she swore she did. For some reason, she felt as though she had to be cautious while entering her own home. Stepping lightly on her old wooden floor, her head was on a swivel, and she looked in every direction to make sure that there was nobody inside and that nothing was askew. For the most part, everything looked the same, but her ash bowl on the floor next to her coffee table in the living room caught her attention. I definitely didn't do that. She held her breath and listened intently. After a few moments, she heard nothing in the house and assumed there was nobody inside. Throwing caution to the wind, she ran to her husband's study. The door was astrewn, even though she knew she closed it. There were papers everywhere, and every drawer was on the ground. Jesus Christ! Even the computer had been smashed to pieces. Florence assumed that after finding nothing in his paper files, they had turned to the computer. Just like with her, they came up with nothing other than cryptic emails. I guess that really pissed them off. Only explanation for the fucking computer. Florence used her foot to move some of the papers over to the side, and then got on her knees right near the right-hand side of the room. She started knocking on the boards, listening for that hollow sound. I know we kept it around here somewhere. It took her a few moments, but eventually she heard a distinct hollow sound. Bingo! She looked to her left and grabbed at a screwdriver that was on the floor. Using it, she positioned it just right under the seam in the floor and lifted up the board, which came up easily without any hesitation. Thank God! I'm glad he didn't get rid of it. She lifted out an old metal military-style toolbox and placed it next to her. Opening it, she was happy to see his old revolver and a good amount of bullets were still inside. Lucky you didn't listen to me during that fight. She picked it up, opened the chamber, filled it with bullets, then spun and closed it. She then grabbed a couple of handful of bullets and put them in her pockets. Standing up, she stuck the gun in the front of her waistband and pulled her shirt over it. Now all I need is a flashlight. Making her way down the snowy streets, her pace got quicker and quicker with every step, the stiff snow crunching under her winter boots. She knew exactly where she needed to go. Her mind unclouded by all the confusion of the last few days. In her mind, she had the answer to it all. As she briskly walked she heard the ongoing commotion that damned wilted flower had caused. She stopped for a moment, squinted to see the spectacle that was going on all the way over the lake. She could barely make it out, but noticed that not only were people fighting, but a few people seemed to be submerged in the sub-zero water. She shook her head and continued to walk to the gym. Time seemed to be at a standstill, and before she knew it, she was married between the two large oak trees that stood in front of the dilapidated gym. She looked at what should have been pristine white snow on the concrete stairs that had a minimal incline to the front door, but all the snow had already melted. It seemed like a lot of footprints had traversed the stairway. Seems like everything's to do with me is getting popular these days. Wish I got the invite. She smirked to herself and lit up a cigarette and then quickly walked to the door and opened it. She pushed her way in through the metallic blue doors and walked down the straight hallway. Each and every light flickering, it almost seemed like they flickered in harmony with every step she took. But she knew where she was going. At least she felt that way. Her instincts told her to go into the main gym, but she knew that wasn't her final destination. She veered right down the corridor to the handicapped and family bathroom. Even in her state of mind, she smirked. Why did we ever have a handicapped or a family bathroom? Everyone who came here was of able body and definitely didn't have a family. Unless you're counting that sort of family. She gripped her head. So many memories are coming back. She ran up to the bathroom and threw up in the white porcelain receptacle. Everything seemed to be rushing back to her in waves, like her bouts of vomit. But just like the vomit, she wanted to forget everything as soon as it erupted in her mind. As much as she tried to remember, her mind didn't let her. It wasn't coming back to her, even though she had the overwhelming sense of familiarity. The toilet was strangely clean, even though it had been many years since anyone that wasn't a tweaker or an Ivy League-bound teen had used it. Florence stood up and slammed the door behind her. When she did, a photo fell off the wall. It was the photo from the community center of everyone, including Henry, who she did not know how to feel about anymore. She turned the photo frame around, unnotching the golden pegs keeping the cardboard backing in the cheap plastic frame, and removed the backing. There was a number, 32700. She could have sworn the photo was taken at an earlier date, but brushed it off for now as she put it in her back pocket. Her head was becoming a little more leveled at this point. She continued down the hallway and again entered the empty gym. The sounds of cheering fans filled her ears, mixed with the sounds of camera shutters, clicking one after the other. She took a step back and covered her eyes. With labored breath, she flicked on her flashlight and surveyed the room, seeing if there was anything she missed before. Same as last time, everything was missing. The floor cluttered with only broken ceiling tiles, used needles, and enough dust to fill your nightmares. Florence noticed an equipment cabinet in the corner. It had a rotary lock, and although unopened, she could tell that many had tried with brute force. No specific number came to mind, so she briskly walked out of the gym and into her husband's office. The scene inside was very much the same as the one inside of her home. Papers everywhere, shelves overturned, and broken photos all over the floor. She looked around for any semblance of information that could help her open the lock. Nothing. Not a single thing that seemed of any importance. Pacing around the room, she attempted to think what it possibly could be. Only a couple of numbers sprung to mind, and thus she walked back to the gym. Walked over to the cabinet, started by entering her birthday. Nothing. Entered Henry's birthday. Nothing. Entered both the date they adopted and the date of death of their beloved pet. Nothing. She tried the date they had opened the gym. Nothing. She followed that up with the date of her first win with him by her side. Not a single click. There was only one other number that came to mind. Their anniversary. Here's to nothing. She entered it, and as the last number clicked, she honestly assumed it would have opened like some stupid mystery novel. But still nothing. She slumped down against it, defeated. That's all the numbers I can think of, Henry. You sure did make this it. She paused for a moment. Fucking Christ. Please don't tell me that's how stupid of a sap you are. She stood back up and began clicking the numbers. 2, 15, 59. Of course. The door stuff. 2, 15, 59. The door swung open. Of course you'd use the date of our first meeting. It wasn't even that good of a day. Better for you than it was me. The first date that followed was utter trash, but I guess you'd find importance in that number. She expected to find something interesting, or telling, or anything that would bring some kind of closure to what was going on. But there was nothing inside, aside from old, treasured gear that he had kept for years. It was deeper than most equipment cabinets, but she wasn't fully surprised. He had so many helmets and gloves and jerseys and even tattered shoes that held some kind of nostalgic memento in his memory. Her first training gloves, old and used, the gloves from her first champion win, all kinds of stupid shit that she had forgotten about and thrown aside with little care. Surveying all the gear, and somewhat entranced, she didn't break from her gaze until she heard the familiar sound of the front doors opening and footsteps making their way to the gym. The footsteps carried purpose behind them, and wasn't some tweaker looking for some place to get high. Fortunately, the cabinet was large enough that she situated herself inside. She made the lock to spin before closing. Footsteps made their way inside, and close to her, stopping right out in front of the cabinet. 2 distinct voices were heard, but the words themselves were muffled through the door. They continued to walk around, arguing with each other for a few minutes, and then made their way outside, but not before one of them made a very audible punch into one of the walls in anger. She let out a breath that she swore she could have held in for hours, and then stood up to find the opening mechanism on the inside. Much to her dismay, she had tripped on a sweatband and fell against the back of the cabinet. Once again, she heard the ringing sound of something hollow. The fuck? She flicked on her flashlight again and studied the back panel of the cabinet. Moving a jersey to one side, she pointed her flashlight beam at the top left corner. There was a section that was out of place. She grabbed the gun out of her belt and wedged the handle into the folded corner. Pulling with all her might, it came out surprisingly easily. The whole back panel was a fake cardboard piece. Behind it, a door with a keypad lock. She thought for a moment. What would possibly be the combination? Then, as though without thinking, pulled out the photo from her pocket and entered the number into the keypad. Unlike her, she was shaking, actually nervous for once. She entered the number into the keypad, 32700, and held her breath. Oh, right, she thought. I should probably enter the 0. So she entered 032700. As soon as she entered the last numbers, a siren started to wail. Fuck it, she said. She saw a large piece of thick scrap metal on the floor. I'll just have to do this the old-fashioned way. She smirked. Isn't that the way you would have wanted it, Henry? Florence started bashing up the keypad as well as the door frame in general, as the siren kept chirping in an almost deafening tone. She was breaking a sweat and still pounding at the mechanisms. Right when she was about to give up, it gave way. The door slowly opened. Heh, old-fashioned ways always work. She grabbed the door and pried it open. Looking downward, she noticed a dark, seemingly unending set of stairs that descended into an area that she knew not. Each step cold and uninviting. In her mind, knowing how no one was supposed to be here. She hoped the alarm had not drawn anyone towards the gym. Hopefully, the 2 others who had been inside were well away when it went off. Once she reached the bottom of the stairs, she met with a short hallway. At the end, a door with no frame. This door, surprisingly, had no lock or security on it. Apparently, the first marks of security were enough in the mind of whoever set this up. She grabbed the door handle and flung it open. It was a black room, illuminated only by fluorescent lights. They flooded the entire room, revealing 6 rows of that flower. The same flower that was at the park. The same flower that was in the window at the diner. The flower that she remembered Henry showing her. Without thinking, she ran to the door, went through it, and shut it. She heard a voice. Good job! Everyone who knew about this room never thought of closing it from the inside. Everyone who knew about its whereabouts never feared it would be found. My biggest fear must have become a reality. The voice was static and unemotional. Don't act like this is some pre-recorded message. She shook her head. You led me here and you knew I'd get here. The question is, where are you? A faint laugh was heard through the unseen speakers. I'm close by, trying to find the best route to get there myself. Make yourself at home for the time being. The voice cut out with a heavy static sound and a high-pitched squeal similar to microphone feedback. Florence surveyed the room. 6 rows of potted flowers, a board with papers pinned to it, and growing supplies, as well as dirt littering every inch of the floor. Looked like the cross between a meth lab and some teenager's weed grow. Every flower had a high fluorescent lamp hung above it. A couple had been burnt out, and as a result, the flowers beneath them had withered. Truly withered, unlike the flower near the lake. She walked up to the many papers and started to skim through them. There were old papers dictating its cultural, recreational, spiritual, and medical uses over the last 6 centuries. Some papers, from what she could tell, were ripped straight from old books of folklore. Flower of life, youth eternal, breath of beauty. Florence once again had a slight flashback from here. Florence once again had a slight flashback from her time with Henry at the lake when he first showed her the flower. There were also so many newer documents written in his handwriting, and others that had obviously been printed from message boards. All of the documents had scattered writing by Henry, written in the corners, sides, all over any blank space, linked to or commenting on, in her mind, anything that he thought important. She diverted her gaze to the rest of the room and realized it extended further than she originally thought. The board, which was positioned against an old brick wall, seemed to be the cutoff from lab to home. She walked around the brick barrier and noticed a section that had been filled with a simple cot and downtrodden couch, among other things. The motion Florence... The motion fluorescent did not reach this room, and so she pulled out her flashlight to look for another source of light. She spied a single dangling metal cord in the middle of the room, walked up to it, pulled on it, and watched as the old light flickered into action. The entire area was now illuminated. She could see an old box-set TV, a shoddy desk with papers strewn all over it, and an ash bowl filled to the brim on the corner. Empty beer and liquor bottles were littering the floor. She even noticed a small yet detailed shelf filled with many of what she knew to be Henry's favorite books, as well as other scientific and botanical encyclopedias. Sitting on the small couch was a laptop, though this laptop wasn't smashed almost entirely. Although she didn't expect anything, she opened it and pressed the power button. Nothing, just as she figured. So, this is what became of that stupid man. She sat down on the couch for a moment, went to grab a cigarette, but noticed something. What looked like a joint on the ground near the TV. She knew Henry had smoked marijuana in the past, but since moving here, neither of them had any connections and didn't feel like asking any of the local hoodlums in their old and brushed-off age. All the same, she picked it up, unsure what to do and unsure how long she'd be here. Lighting it, she took in a deep breath, let it out. After a long countdown in her mind, she pulled it away from her mouth and looked down at it with a confused look. It's definitely not weed. She didn't want to stay in this dark, dank room after smoking whatever the hell she just did, and thought some fresh air would do her good. She had a strange pulling feeling to take one of the flower specimens. She grabbed the one closest to her in the large white room and looked around cautiously. She could have sworn that there was another door in Henry's abode. She went back and saw a tapestry hanging on the wall, crudely hung with 2 nails, and lifted it up. Bingo! It was a simple plywood door with a golden handle, and it was unlocked. Once again, she was faced with a narrow stairwell and briskly ran up. When she opened the door at the top of the stairs, she noticed that it was blocked with something. The smell made her cover her face as she realized it was a dumpster. With the flower pot in one arm, she used her shoulder to try with all her might to push the gargantuan dumpster. At the moment, the weight of it seemed to get lighter, and she also saw a shadow of another person's footprints coming from underneath it. As it rolled away, she saw that it was Jake Ferry. His eyes were almost bulging out of their sockets, and he was sputtering unintelligible nonsense. It didn't even sound like he was attempting to speak. Regardless of his questionable mental state, he looked sobered and taken aback as soon as he saw a face. Florence knew he wasn't expecting anyone to be behind that dumpster. His crazed state made her unaware of the fact that half his jacket was drenched in blood and was dripping on the tar and soot-covered snow in the alleyway. "Jake, what the fuck happened to you?" she asked cautiously. He only acknowledged her with wild eyes, shoved her to the ground, and ran to the stairwell. It was only a few seconds after she heard loud thuds coming from the door and stood up cautiously. She peeked through the doorframe, seeing his body laid down. His body slumped down at the bottom of the staircase. His back was riddled with at least a dozen stab wounds, each more furious than the last. She didn't even want to venture down to the bottom of the stairs. There was obviously no point in checking on him, as he was long gone. Clutching her ears, they rang as the unmistakable monotone static voice began to speak. "Trust me, this is for the best." She bolted out of the alleyway, not even trying to get back home, just trying to run away from all of this. The thought of hitching a ride to anywhere but here even crossed her mind, but at this point, she wouldn't get into a car with anyone, being as she didn't know who to trust anymore. Was what she saw even real back there? She couldn't have seen Jake so frantic and obviously attacked. It must be whatever was in that laced cigarette. At that very moment, her vision started to blur, and it seemed like there were hues and echoes of every color and shape she saw in front of her. Still walking, her body felt present, but her mind kept dipping into long-forgotten memories that should be buried in the past. Almost like her mind was playing a recording. She couldn't see anything, but heard the voice of Henry from years ago. He was on the phone, or at least sounded like he was, being it was only his voice that she could hear. "I told you not to call here." There was a great anger and tension in his voice. "I am aware of the arrangement, and I haven't done anything to back out as of yet. Don't act like I have." She obviously couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could feel the hostility inside of Henry's life force. There was a long, quiet pause. "I understand. I'll get it done. Just treat me like some hunting dog." She didn't hear a phone hitting the receiver. She didn't hear anything. She felt cold, and it seemed as though the environment had changed. A muffled television program was audible to her ears. She attempted to pick up on any other noises, and was able to focus in on Henry's voice once again. His voice was mainly cancelled out by the television, but she heard one sentence that she wouldn't forget. "No, she doesn't know, and I'd like to keep it that way." The sound of a car horn brought her back to reality. She looked around hastily and noticed a pair of headlights heading in her direction. With no time to move, the lights made their way to her with increasing speed. Just like a punch to the gut, she felt the car hit her. Right as she opened her eyes once again, she found herself in the alleyway, outside the entrance to the lab, next to the dumpster. Her breathing was incredibly heavy, feeling as if she had just died and woken again. Looking around, she heard the sound of approaching footsteps, moving quickly. She ducked behind the dumpster and pulled it against the door. Footsteps sounded familiar, and she heard the heavy breathing of who she could only assume was Jake Ferry. She crouched down and looked underneath the dumpster at the shoes that were only standing a few feet away. Same as before, crimson blood on the dirty snow. A loud, angered scream erupted from the man's lungs as he slammed his hands down on the dumpster. A few seconds passed, and then she noticed his body fall in the snow. The same wild eyes staring at her, but this time they were lifeless, as she stared into them through the gap underneath the dumpster. A moment passed, and then she heard another set of footsteps. A pair of shiny black dress shoes covered in snow were visible through the gap. She noticed as the figure kneeled down and pressed a hand against Jake's lifeless neck. The hand stayed for a second, and then retracted as the figure stood up. Florence heard the scuffling as the footsteps ran away. The sound of the footsteps trailed off and were lost. The only sound reaching her attention was that of a car horn. However, unlike she expected, there was no sound of a collision, only the skidding of tires as they corrected and then sped along on their way. Florence once again pressed the dumpster forward and peeked out to make sure the coast was clear. When she noticed that no one was around, she surveyed Jake's lifeless body. Just as in her vision, or memory, his back was riddled with stab wounds. She looked down the alley and with her eyes followed the footsteps which she had previously taken earlier. Well, this is some shit. Instead of leaving, she decided to retreat back into the lab, making sure to position the dumpster behind her before she closed the door and made her way down the steps into the cold room. Fuck that, my journal. Cautiously opening the door, she didn't know what to expect, but to her surprise, nobody was in there. Nothing had been touched. She let out a sigh of relief, knowing that she hadn't gone through the room thoroughly, or pretty much at all, and decided it was time to look for something, anything, that would piece these fragmented memories and clues together. Walking over to the desk in the living area, she noticed that this back area had moist green carpet that squished under her sneakers. Ugh, disgusting. Not surprising, being as this place had been a total dump, but she did wonder how the flowers were still being grown in a mere room over with the conditions here being so dilapidated. There were water stains and panels missing in the ceiling, as well as mold colonies growing on many different areas of the walls, ceilings. Hell, they were growing over the entire room. Florence walked up to the desk with the scattered papers, deciding that she should actually inspect them instead of just getting high with the first thing she saw. Even though her mind was still somewhat lost, she knew she was down enough to still make sense of the documents in front of her, whatever they were. There were many papers with notes attached to them, with Henry's scribbly, unreadable handwriting. She squinted and looked at them, realizing they were just about how to grow and preserve this precious plant. God damn, she thought. I know tending to a plant is important, but is all this paperwork just about that? She rifled through a few more pieces of different papers and saw the handwriting on a letter that was unmistakably Nicole's. I hope this letter finds you in good health. That's all I hope for you and for Florence. I didn't think it would go this far and everyone would become so desperate. I truly believed that when we exposed our community to this discovery we had found, that it would have made everything better, but well, I don't know why I'm explaining it to you. You were there and you know it happened. Anyway, I'm writing this from my new town. I hope you receive it and hope you make the decision to leave soon. I know it will be hard with your wife, but it's better for you outside of that place where nobody knows who you are. The best, Nicole. As Florence got to the end of the letter, she noticed that it was dated over 5 years ago. She put it back on the desk. If Nicole had left all those years ago, who was at the community center? Florence scoffed. Well, I guess it doesn't matter, being as I saw their faces all over town. Anyone could be them. Maybe no one is. She looked through some of the papers. They were mostly insurance documents and leases for the building, but she did notice one that was dated. It was the fire insurance policy. No. I'm going to recut that. She looked through some other papers. They were mostly insurance documents and leases for the building, but she did notice that one was dated, the February or whatever one, 2/15/59, but it was 2/15/2019. It was the fire insurance policy. She looked at the policy confused. Even at this point, I don't think any insurance company would pay up on some dilapidated gym. She scanned to see if anything included the lab beneath, but there was nothing mentioning the lab whatsoever. She let out a heavy sigh and walked out into the main grow area. Florence diverted her attention back to the main board. Scanning over it, she found a few pages that seemed to mark experimental data over the past few years. She was unsure what the units of measurement meant, but many of the pages noted different numbers equaling different reactions in the test host. Knowing Henry, I have a feeling he was that test host. He never was one to trust others' physical and mental reactions compared to his own. The smaller the number, the more simple the effect. Lightheadedness, bouts of laughter, heavy joints, light joints, muffled sound, visual traces, etc. It was until the dosages got really high, or more concentrated, that the effects really started to change. Some of the numbers got higher. She also noticed that some were lower, but simply only had a different unit of measurement next to them. For all the previous testing, the host seemed to remain the same person, i.e. Henry. But as the dosages got more intense, a host 2 was listed. At this point, all of the generic narcotic effects seemed to be both heightened and uncontrollable. Intense chronic paranoia, which does not leave the host no matter how long they've been off the substance. This effect could be seen similar to a withdrawal, if not for the fact that further taking of the substance does not quell these feelings at all. In fact, interestingly enough, the paranoia seems to grow worse the more they take. Host 2 says that the paranoia feels better for only the first 60 seconds after taking a dosage. Florence scanned the papers to see if she could find anything else. There were 2 that specifically caught her eye: The Flower of Youth and Where to Go From Here. She decided to read the first. As I expected, upon pure and concentrated dosages of the flower, the host simply gets very intoxicated. Legend behind the Flower of Youth is merely a myth, that is, to the scientific mind. Upon questioning, hosts will tell you that he feels years and years younger than he was, invigorated both mentally and physically. Despite whatever the body happens to be in, the hosts will push themselves beyond their belief limits, to the point of hysterics. No increased or renewed strength is actually present, just simply the results of the flower. Interestingly enough, similar to psychological treatment with psychedelics, the host seems to be able to recall memories almost perfectly, as if those memories were playing in front of them on a projector. Or so that's what the host tells me. Further study on the effects of memory would need to be tested on more than one host. Host 1 experienced none of these phenomena. The depression or listlessness of host 2 seemed to disappear in the mind almost immediately on this set dosage and remained hidden even days to a week after the last given dose. Of course, too much time from the last dose made this return with a vengeance, like the paranoia the host still constantly felt, even at the current dosage. The only difference is that the euphoria seemed to outweigh the paranoia in the closed mind. Further experimentation with host 2 will continue. At this point, I'm unsure whether I'm going to increase the dose, but I know that I'm going to lengthen out the time between doses either way. All information up to this point has been very helpful. She shook her head and then continued on to the next paper. Where to Go From Here. Much to my dismay, my research was requested much quicker than I wished. The recipients were very pleased with my findings and asked for a sample to be spread around. Not wanting to jinx anything, I gave them a smaller dosage than I had given host 2 at the given time. I watered it down and passed it around in a tea that was able to be taken by many people without fear of uncontrolled overdose. They are still not entirely aware of where my source is for the drug, and I wish to keep it that way for as long as possible. For the time being, they seemed pleased, and I'm still able to keep my head down. There was a break between the paragraph at the bottom of the page, a hastily written scribble that read, "Continue on page 2. Noticing how many pages were left, Florence ripped the stack off the board, ripped off the first page, and continued to read. Up until the current time, the only real problem host 2 had dealt with was a constant paranoia between refills and doses. He had remained somewhat calm. This time, however, everything changed. He arrived on my doorstep at my personal home and demanded to both speak with me and be administered another dosage immediately. I made sure that my wife did not find out about his arrival. I then quickly hurried him to the lab. He was increasingly agitated with every passing minute. Cold sweats, shaking, nervous tics, constant leg movement, and bloodshot eyes. I also noticed that his pants had been somewhat torn at the knees, which I attributed to the constant scratching I had noticed him to do as he attempted to sit still. The following is the account of host 2. Okay, so at first, everything was feeling fine. I always felt the paranoia, and that hasn't gone away. It is never away, and doesn't seem to go away no matter what I do. I just try to focus on other things, like I've been trying to do since the start of this. You think after all this time I'd get used to the paranoia, but it just sits there, like a thorn in my side. Huh, now the memories. Oh, the memories are wonderful? Maybe they're terrible. First it was all the little things I couldn't remember, but wanted to desperately. The look on my daughter's face on her 7th birthday, trip with my wife where we bleed our hearts to one another. Anything and everything beautiful that seemed to escape my mind over the years. Now I don't know if this is my fault for thinking or if the flower is just doing this to me in general, but beautiful. Like I said, it was everything beautiful. Everything I wanted to remember, everything I had forgotten, came back in some kind of nostalgic beauty. But then it changed. Like I said, I'm not sure if it's because I wanted to remember more or not, because I did. I spent hours every day trying to recall all of my wonderful memories. Sure, I didn't forget everything, but having these memories play out for me was transcendent. And so I wanted more. And this is what life flashing before your eyes before dying is like. I understand some kind of beauty before the death. Anyway, my search for more and more memory, I've started seeing the darker things. The times I hit my wife. The time my daughter backed over our dog in the car. The time my son committed suicide. Just like the beauty of previous memories, each one more and more lovely than before, these memories became more and more dark with every passing day. They played before my eyes, dark, dim, like I was stuck in some old theater all by myself, strapped in, unable to move. No matter what I did, no matter what I thought, I couldn't get them to stop playing. Of course, that is, until I took more than you told me to. The more I do, it seemed like these terrible memories and all the atrocities that happened in my life would disappear for a short while. For an entire day, I had no memories at all. He almost shrieked that last sentence, making me reel back. He remained in his chair, but his eyes, I can't forget his eyes. They had seen so much, and I know that, but I obviously let him continue. I mean, hell, of course I had memories, but no more of the pop-up family home movies playing. In some ways it was scary, and I wanted them, but in another way I felt relaxed and able to focus. I spent so much time in my memories that I forgot how wonderful I felt. I spent the entire day fixing up things around the house that I had put off. I felt like a god, 40 years younger, in my prime, invincible. I even made love to my wife with so much vigor it took her by shock. I remember going to sleep that day feeling accomplished, free. But that was only at first. Each and every one of my dreams was a different memory. I couldn't tell if they were mine or someone else's. All I remember was death. Over and over and over and over and over again. Just death. Fucking death, Henry. I'd be hit by a car, I'd die. I'd get shot, I'd die. Fall off a ravine hiking, I'd die. Over again. It's non-stop scenes of death. Like I said, whether it was mine or someone else's, I could feel and I couldn't see. It hurt like hell every time. And what seemed like an eternity, it was only scenes of non-stop death. No precursor, no narrative, just scenes of non-stop death. I remember trying as hard as I could for what seemed like forever to change and stop the endless scenes. It took God knows how long. But I eventually did. And it was worse. To think all I craved for before was some kind of narrative or change, boy was I wrong. Many of the same scenes played before me, this time showing everything that led up to them before I saw them. I thought all the anger, sadness, I felt everything. I heard everything. I had no idea where any of the images and feelings came from. I had no idea if they were even real. But then 2 specific memories struck a chord, which changed my whole thinking. It made me realize this was real. I was in a crappy apartment, or a dorm, or something. I saw through the eyes of whoever the fuck I was. There were no lights on. The only thing I could hear, some TV blaring through the thin walls. My body let out a sigh, a depressed as fuck sigh. Against my will, I went and grabbed a chair from my computer desk, and I brought it towards the middle of the room and faced it towards the door. I walked to my bed and grabbed a rope. It was only at this time that I noticed I was dressed in a nice suit with a red tie. I tried to scream as much as I could, tried to stop myself, but I couldn't. I strung the rope over a beam in the crappy dorm, strung the other side around my neck, and kicked the chair from below me. The pain. The pain. Fucking unbearable pain. I couldn't believe how much it hurt. Every other death I witnessed and felt was painful, but they were quick. This seemed to last forever. Up until the last breath fell from my lungs, my body was dead, but I was still there. Still noticed everything around me. Time seemed to speed up at this point. I watched as the room went from light to dark, over and over again. I watched as an old lady walked into my room and screamed out in fear before leaving. The woman looked familiar, but I couldn't place her face before she left. The door was still open after that, and I could see her slumped against the door outside on the phone. A couple more hours, at least I assume it was that long, had passed. A new group of people walked into the room, and all at once I saw it. Me. Me. Actually me. The real me. Barely a moment of process. I watched as I fell before my corpse, tears bawling down my eyes. How in the hell could I have seen that? The only memory I have is on John strung up. There's no way in hell I could have known or seen what he had been through, but I did. This flower, this drug, will make you see the death of anyone, but not just the past. The next thing I saw was my house. I was cooking dinner. Normal, simple, the light beginning to fade as the sun was setting. I felt uneasy and agitated outside my skin, if that makes sense for a delirious idiot dreaming about others' deaths. There's not much I remember, not in this memory. What I do remember is grabbing the largest kitchen knife and making my way upstairs. I walked up my stairs, down my hallway, and I stopped as I stared at a photo of our family on an end table. "I'm sorry," is the last and only thing I said as I walked to the bathroom, sat down in the tub, and cut my wrists. After the light faded from my eyes, I woke up. I was drenched in fucking sweat. I could feel all the pain from all the memories slowly subsiding as I looked over to my wife in bed next to me, sleeping soundly. For the next 3 days, I did the best I could to keep tabs on her. I talked to her whenever I could, asked if anything was bothering her, but nothing changed it. I did everything I could. No matter what. No matter anything was bothering her. No matter what was going on, nothing changed it. I came home from work 3 days ago. Found her in the tub. At this point, host 2 fell into a fit of hysterics and tears. I said nothing, as I was unsure of what to say, and just waited. After about 5 minutes, his composure returned with a newfound goal. His eyes were crazy, that of a user whose intention was only to get their next fix. I need more. I was already close to running out before she killed herself, but I took even more the moment I found her. It was the only thing that made me feel good again, the only thing that made me forget and remember her all at the same time. Occasionally the good and bad memories tried to flash in my brain, but I tried to snuff them out, tried to focus my mind on other things. Despite the paranoia, despite the bad memories, despite the dreams that had come every night since the first, I felt fantastic. That's all that mattered. That's all that matters. I'm not even sure what happened, or if it even did happen. I don't want to know. Maybe she's in the tub. Maybe she left me. I don't care. I don't want to care anymore. I want to feel good. I want to be the strong, independent man that I've been since my 20s. It's been harder to cope as the days have gone by. I've been out for 3 days. I know I'm not supposed to get another dosage till sometime next week. Obviously attributed to my overuse. But I need more, and I need it now. He stared at me, unmoving. Occasionally a twitch ran through his body, but all his symptoms of withdrawal disappeared in this moment. He was fixated on me, like a predator looking for their prey. I tried to explain to him that in general I was trying to wean him off the substance. The dosage had been lowered every single week, and at this point was almost lower than the dosage he began taking. I obviously needed more research, but with Host 2 I was hoping to stop. This had been a trying and different experience with him, but not one for the better. The effects of the flower had twisted his mind. What I didn't tell him is that his last handful of doses was nothing more than sugar pills. Sadly, confirming that the effects were too far gone, and at this point the mind had taken over in an equally toxic endeavor. The events leading up to and preceding his wife's death were days he was not even taking any of the flower concentrate. I was hoping to wean him off in a simple manner, but at this point I had no choice but to cut him off cold turkey. I made whatever excuses I could, sympathized with him to the best of my abilities, and tried to send him on his way. He was furious, and started a physical fight with me, yelling obscenities and breaking anything within his vicinity. It took some time, but I subdued him. I then took him back to his home, placed him on his couch, and debated whether or not to call the police. Whether or not I could have made the call anonymously, I didn't want anything linking back to me, so I went on my way. Florence looked over the last page. I don't know what to do. My contacts seem to be addicted to the substance despite how low of a dose I've been feeding them over the last few weeks. They seem all but obsessed. The only thing that's working in my favor is that they don't know I'm the one who created it. I haven't heard a thing from Host 2 since our last encounter. I simply read in the papers that he had died from a mixture of a stroke and a heart attack. Suffice to say, nobody knows why. Before the previous events with Host 2, I had planned on finding a few more test subjects, but with the recent circumstances, I have no desire to do so. My contacts continue to pressure me for more and more of the flower, stating many of the same effects Host 2 felt on a much higher dosage. This must be something in the mind that has to do with the hosts themselves. Although never reaching as high of a dose as Host 2, Host 1 never experienced any of those incredible effects. I feel as though eyes are prying on me no matter where I go. I need to get out. This can't continue for much longer. No matter what happens, I can't be a part of this anymore. The last few words burned into Florence's eyes. She didn't know how to respond, but was glad she took a second look at Henry's writings. Her eyes had been so fixated on the paper that she hadn't realized what was on the whiteboard behind where the paper was placed. A list of names. Host 2, Nicole Spandish, Clarissa Unia, Jake Ferry, Thomas Maxwell, J.S. Castor, and a few others Florence didn't recognize. Host 2 and Clarissa had a red line crossed through their names. It took her a moment, but she remembered that Thomas Maxwell was the name of the town's sheriff. All of the names correspond with people directly linked to Henry, and directly linked to the flower, I suppose. She paused for a moment. He's crossed off the names of everyone who's died so far. Is he the one doing these killings? Or is he just noting their deaths? He didn't cross off Maxwell, which means he either doesn't know or hasn't been here since his death. She pulled out a cigarette and lit it up. Jesus Christ, this is too much. She giggled, something that she rarely does. But considering the circumstances of a bunch of aging small-town folk being obsessed with a tropical flower that gets you high, or whatever it got them, was out of the ordinary in general, the thought made her giggle even more. But maybe it was just the lingering effects of whatever she had smoked. That made her think, what have I smoked? The taste still clung to her tongue, and with a few more traces of memories came to her mind. That's all they were, traces. Like she had done this before, almost like déjà vu. But it was different this time. She lost herself in the names on the list, and before she knew it, an inch-long tube of ash fell on her foot and brought her out of her stupor. She pulled the cigarette from her mouth and crushed it on the floor under her shoe and smacked her hands together. Okay, if everyone's gone nuts and is faking their own deaths and disappearances, I have to be the one sane person left in this town. That same taste that was lingering in her tongue bothered her. It wasn't like she had just tasted it before. It was like it was bringing back any lapse in her memory, but without any actual memory. Just the feeling of every success she had had, every win she had had, and strangely enough, once again, all the faces of everyone who had died or had even died. It seemed like everyone in this town wasn't even here, or if they were a mockery of their old selves. Once again, she laughed and scoffed and looked at the ground smudging that put on the cigarette. Maybe I'm a mockery of my old self, getting high in the basement thinking of old times. Shit, is this why people are afraid of getting old? Her mind was running 100 miles a minute, thinking of all the years she experienced on this earth. Times alone, times with Henry, times in the town. Oh right, Henry. Where the fuck was he? She looked at her watch, and the time she had spent thinking and reading, she had determined it had been too much time, since he had said he was making his way over. Something must be wrong. What to do? Glancing around the room, her eyes fixated on the pot she had picked up earlier and contained the flower. It would draw way too much attention if I brought the pot with me. Perhaps if I just clip a few leaves, that would be enough to extract its DNA. She shook her head. She didn't know much about horticulture, but that didn't matter much to her at this point. She determined there was no point in wasting any more time here. She looked around for some kind of bag or receptacle in the hoard house of a lab that was around her. She finally spotted a brown paper bag. She finally spotted a brown paper bag she assumed he had used for lunch at some point, and hoped it didn't contain some leftover rotting slop. Once she confirmed its usability, she whipped out her multiple-purpose pocket knife and the scissor attachment, clipped off a few leaves, put them in a bag, and noticed a small bud sprouting. Hoping that would be more helpful than leaves, she snipped it off as well, put it in the bag, and made her way to the back exit. Much to her surprise, she heard a faint ringing, like that of a telephone, coming from somewhere in the room. She made her way toward a stack of papers, pushed them off, and found a phone underneath. Before she could pick it up, and only 2 rings in, the phone automatically went to voicemail. I know you told me not to call here, but things are getting a hell of a lot worse. I don't mean to sound so grim, but I honestly don't think I'm going to make it through the night. I don't know where you are, but they found me. Get somewhere safe, quickly. By God, I hope you make it better than I do. The last few words of Nicole's voice trailed off and rung in her ears. That cemented Florence's plan to leave. Leave the lab, leave the town, just get the fuck out of here. There may still be pieces she didn't know, But like with any seedy organization, there was too much out of her control. Walking up the back steps towards the second exit, making her way up to the dumpster and looking underneath it, making sure the coast was clear before she pushed it out of the way, she frantically made her way back to her house and her only means of escape.
What happens next?
Oh, it just... how all those kind of stories go.
Oh.
Yeah.
The end.